Chapter 197. He wanted to protect Jiang Ruan and not let her get hurt. First of all, they needed to stand in a supreme position and trample all those who despised them under their feet. Only with absolute power could they be absolutely safe. For Jiang Ruan, even if the road to becoming an emperor was filled with slaughter and blood, so what? Mingyu did not speak anymore. She knew that Xian Pei would not say much to her even if she continued to ask, so she quietly retreated to the side. Jiang Ruan had just walked out of the southern courtyard when she heard an unfamiliar voice behind her, Hong and Junju. She turned around and saw a few eunuchs and palace maids surrounding a gray-clothed man. The man was wearing a long gray robe, and the hat almost covered the upper half of his face. Only a delicate lower jaw could be seen, and his voice was somewhat androgynous. At first glance, he gave off a beautiful yet strange feeling. "Your Excellency is..." She smiled slightly. This person did not call her Jining Wangfei, but Hong and Junju. This was the first time in the imperial palace of the great Jin dynasty. "This humble one is Yuan Chuan," the gray-clothed man forced a smile. "I have come a long way from Tianjin to offer my loyalty to the emperor of the Jin dynasty." The eunuch at the side hurriedly explained, "Junju, this Yuan Chuan Darren is an envoy from Tianjin." Without batting an eyelid, Jiang Ruan sized up Yuan Chuan in front of her. She only felt that the other party's attire did not seem to be that of someone from Tianjin. His entire body exuded an indescribable feeling that made people feel somewhat uncomfortable. As for Yuan Chuan, his hat covered his eyes, making it impossible for others to see his expression. This made it even harder for others to guess what he was thinking. "So he is an envoy from Tianjin," Jiang Ruan smiled. "The Jin dynasty is vast and rich in resources. This envoy can travel around and broaden his horizons. The Jin dynasty has always welcomed guests." Her words were sarcastic. An envoy from a defeated country had only come to submit a letter of surrender. Why did he have to put on an air of righteousness? Moreover, his words did not leave any leeway for the fact that Tianjin was a small country and its people were short-sighted. The faces of the two eunuchs at the side turned slightly green. Even though he was the envoy of a defeated country, they still had to show him some respect. If word of this got out, no one would say that the royal family of the great Jin dynasty was abusing their power to bully others. But Hong and Junju was now Jining Wangfei, so naturally, they could not offend her. For a moment, the two little eunuchs felt uneasy in their hearts. They could only hope that Yuan Chuan had a soft temperament and would not care too much about this matter. As expected, Yuan Chuan had a soft temperament. Faced with Jiang Ruan's loaded words, he did not reveal the slightest trace of indignation. Instead, he smiled and said, "Just now, I saw the princess coming out of the southern courtyard." Yuan Chuan knew that the 13th prince was living in the southern courtyard. "I did not expect the princess and the 13th prince to have such a deep sibling relationship. Even though blood is not thicker than water, their relationship is still so deep." The faces of the two eunuchs instantly turned pale again. Just now, they had thought that Yuan Chuan was a soft-spoken person, but now that they looked at him again, they felt that this person was extremely detestable. These words were to say that Jiang Ruan and Xian Pei were merely putting on an act, and to the point of ruining Jiang Ruan's clean reputation. If it were not for the fact that Jiang Ruan was already married, if these words were to spread, who knew how big of a storm it would cause? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, as if she was completely unaware of the slander in Yuan Chuan's words. A strange light flashed across her beautiful face, but it disappeared in an instant. She smiled and said, 13th younger brother asked Ben Gong to search for a few unique copies outside the palace. Coincidentally, Ben Gong found them and sent them along with the things that the Empress Dowager wanted to give to 13th younger brother. I wonder if Yuan Chuan Darren has any objections. She had brought up Empress Dowager Ida, which meant that she had already prepared a backup plan. The words Yuan Chuan Darren were really full of sarcasm. What right did an envoy of Tianjin have to discipline the family affairs of the great Jin dynasty's imperial family? His hand had really stretched too far. Yuan Chuan paused and did not speak for a long time. However, the two eunuchs beside him had already revealed angry expressions. One's own country was definitely not for outsiders to meddle in, and an envoy dared to express his opinion on the imperial family's affairs. In a moment, Yuan Chuan had unexpectedly incurred the wrath of the masses. After a long while, Yuan Chuan then said, Junju is indeed a gentle and kind elder sister who dotes on her younger brother. He could not find out anything. Even if he had some suspicions, Empress Dowager Ida and the unique copies in her hands were irrefutable evidence. No one would be able to find out anything wrong. Jiang Yuan had always been attentive to Xian Pei's matters, especially now that Xian Pei was in the palace and countless eyes were on him. Jiang Yuan would never do anything that could be used against him. Even if it was an ordinary meeting, it would be cleaned up cleanly, and no one would be able to find out anything. Likewise. Jiang Yuan smiled. Yuan Chuan slowly lowered his head and said, since this is the case, Yuan Chuan will not disturb Juanju's departure. As he said this, he made a strange bow, which was most likely the etiquette of Tianjin. Jiang Yuan glanced at him and smiled, envoy, take care. During the day, because of Xian Pei's matter, Jiang Yuan once again sorted out the matter. Reuniting with Xian Pei was really a pleasant surprise, and even her sad mood because of Baiji's death became a little more cheerful. Lian Xiao faintly knew that this had something to do with Xian Pei, but she did not know the reason. After Jiang Yuan's mood became cheerful, she even looked through many of the account books that had piled up in the past few days. She stayed in the study until late at night, when Lian Xiao came in and said, Miss, it's time to rest. Jiang Yuan put down the book in her hands, rubbed her eyes, got up, washed up, and returned to her bedroom. Xiao Xiao had already returned to the room. At this moment, he had taken off his outer clothes, and only wore a jade-colored inner garment. He reclined on the bed and was flipping through a book. As soon as Jiang Yuan walked in, her footsteps stiffened. Previously, she had shared a bed with Xiao Xiao only because of the first night of their wedding. Later, she had been poisoned, and after returning to the Fu, because of Baiji's matter, her mind was completely not on it. Now that the matter had come to an end, it was all piled up in front of her again. Being alone with Xiao Xiao like this, especially in the name of husband and wife, was really a little awkward. Looking at a beauty under the light, a beauty like jade. When Xiao Xiao was dressed in black, he was always austere and cold. However, whenever he took off his black clothes and changed into light-colored clothes, that bit of coldness became a kind of elegant and reserved nobility, and the austere also became a warm and gorgeous beauty. Her jet-black hair hung down to her shoulders, and the side of her face was beautiful beyond compare. It was as if she was a piece of beautiful jade, sparkling with light. Sensing Jiang Yuan's movements, Xiao Xiao raised his eyes and glanced at her. Jiang Yuan nonchalantly walked to the side of the bed and sat down. Xiao Xiao was slightly startled. He put the book in his hands on the table and looked at her, puzzled. Jiang Yuan coughed softly, and immediately felt a little annoyed. Why did this look like she was not satisfied? Quickly discarding this absurd thought in her mind, she pretended to be very calm and skillfully lifted the quilt, lay down, and covered herself with the quilt again. When she turned her head, she met Xiao Xiao's thoughtful gaze. Jiang Yuan's face suddenly became somewhat feverish. She thought of what Xian Pei had said during the day about how much older she was than Xiao Xiao, and she was stunned. Feeling that the atmosphere was really a little strange, she looked at Xiao Xiao and said, Today, I met Tianjin's envoy, Yuan Chuan, in the palace. Xiao Xiao absent-mindedly said, N. He's not from Tianjin. Jiang Yuan frowned, and without waiting for Xiao Xiao to ask, she said, I deliberately belittled and damaged Tianjin in front of him, but he actually did not have the slightest reaction. No matter how bad a person was in the world, he would not tolerate others bullying his own family. Especially for an envoy, who represented the face of a country, he would absolutely not allow him to so easily humiliate his own country. If Yuan Chuan was really as soft and amiable as he appeared on the surface, the emperor of Tianjin would not have sent such a person to slap her face. You say that he's not from Tianjin, could he be another spy? What purpose does he have in coming to the palace? I keep feeling that he seems to want to do something to pay. 13th younger brother. Jiang Yuan was still speaking when she suddenly realized that Xiao Xiao did not have any reaction. She could not help but angrily say, "Are you listening?" Just as she finished speaking, she suddenly felt her body become heavy. Unexpectedly, she had been thrown onto the bed. Xiao Xiao propped himself up with one hand and looked down at her condescendingly. His eyes were filled with indistinct emotions. Jiang Ruan's entire body tensed up, and for a moment, she was somewhat dazed and did not know what to do. Xiao Xiao slowly replied, "I'm listening." Some of his smooth, silky black hair fell on Jiang Ruan's face, tickling her heart. His brows were as clear as a painting, his long eyelashes were straight and slightly trembling, his thin lips were lightly pursed, and his breathing was faintly discernible. Jiang Ruan could almost hear the powerful sound of his heartbeat. An oppressive feeling that could not be ignored suddenly assaulted her, bringing with it a kind of ambiguity that was difficult to detect. She was at a loss for words. You're too heavy." Naturally, she did not know that the scene when she said these words was already bright and beautiful. Now, with the movement of her inner clothes, her collar was slightly open, and her dark red undergarment could vaguely be seen. Her complexion was charming, tender, and beautiful, like a newly bloomed rose. Two traces of captivating red floated on her fair face, making her look even more attractive than the best rouge. Her lips were bright red, as if she was attracting people to kiss her. Xiao Xiao had originally only wanted to tease her, as he felt that it was very interesting to see the nervous appearance of this girl, who was usually cold and indifferent. Unexpectedly, with such beauty, even with his cold heart, it was difficult for him to remain indifferent to the scene in front of him. His breathing gradually quickened, and his head gradually leaned towards her. Jiang Ruan's eyes widened, and for a moment, she was at a loss of what to do. In her previous life, when she and Xian Li had thought that their feelings were the strongest, they had only held hands out of courtesy. She had never been so close to a man, and did not know how to resist. She steeled her heart and simply closed her eyes, so nervous that her heart almost jumped out. Unexpectedly, that kiss did not fall, and she heard Xiao Xiao's light laughter. Jiang Yuan suddenly raised her eyes and found that Xiao Xiao was looking at her, and could not help but laugh, as if he found her extremely amusing. Jiang Yuan angrily struggled away, feeling very ashamed. In the end, she glared at Xiao Xiao, grabbed the quilt and tightly wrapped herself from head to toe. Xiao Xiao was helpless, and hugged her through the quilt. "Be careful, don't suffocate." Jiang Yuan did not want to pay attention to him, so Xiao Xiao coaxed her in a low voice, "Yuan, I was wrong, I was nervous." These words were really too shameful. Jiang Yuan sat up with a whoosh, pulled the quilt off her, and glared at him. Xiao Xiao now found Jiang Yuan more and more interesting. No matter how cold and exquisite she was on the outside, at least this side of her was only seen by him, and he could not help but feel proud. Jiang Yuan really lost her temper when she was stared at by his handsome face, and coldly said, "Tomorrow, let me borrow Jin-san, I have something to do." "Okay." Xiao Xiao agreed without thinking, "They are all your people, you don't need to tell me." "You are also my people?" Jiang Yuan looked at him sideways and asked. "I am your people." Xiao Xiao could not help but laugh again. Shameless. Jiang Yuan could not remember how she slept that night, but she felt that the two of them were a step closer than before. At least now that there was one more person on the bed, she felt much more at ease. She was getting used to Xiao Xiao's feelings. However, early in the morning, Steward Lin took advantage of Jiang Yuan and Xiao Xiao eating to come in, singing a little tune. He carefully searched the entire bed, and after confirming that he did not find any traces that he was looking for, he hung his head and left dejectedly. After Xiao Xiao finished eating, he went out to handle some matters, and Jiang Yuan stayed in the fu. Jin-san hurried over after hearing the instructions, and looked at Jiang Yuan, who was sitting on a chair arranging books, and asked, "What does young Furin want Jin-san to do?" Jiang Yuan told Jin-san everything that she wanted to do, and after Jin-san heard it, he was stunned. "Young Furin did not tell young master?" He probably already knows that I want to do this. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Today, I even heard that he ordered people to beat up the people from the case department. Now that young Furin has made such a big move, it will inevitably attract gossip. Although you do not need to take these outsiders' words to heart, can Jin-san be so bold as to ask, why does young Furin want to do this at this critical juncture? Is there any other meaning? Jin-san asked. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, and did not hide anything from him. I have to do this anyway, it is only a matter of time. I have chosen this time because I am tired of it. On the surface, my spearhead seems to be aimed at him, but in reality, it is only aimed at that person in the palace. The bigger the commotion that I make, the more flustered she becomes. I am forcing her to make a move, and because she is cautious in her actions, I cannot find an opportunity to do so. People will only make mistakes when they are flustered, and I am doing all this so that she will take the initiative to deliver the evidence that she has made a mistake to me. Jin-san pondered for a while, and finally understood what she meant. He was pleasantly surprised. Young Furin is very clever. She thought for a while. However, there is bound to be a tough battle today. Does young Furin not need the master to accompany you? The embroidered uniform guards now sincerely trusted Jiang Ruan. At that time, when Jiang Ruan was in danger, she was not willing to escape on her own, and guarded the Jinying Wang Fu to hide their strength. The embroidered uniform guards were full of respect for this kind of female master. People's hearts were made of flesh, and as long as she was in trouble, they would not hold back to help. There is no need. Jiang Ruan smiled. In any case, I am the mistress of this Wang Fu. If I can't even handle such a small matter, then I am really too weak. This is my own matter, and I can handle it. As for Xiao Xiao, he will be busy in the future. Her bright eyes seemed to be surging with a strange emotion, like an eager impulse, but also like a somewhat ironic heartache. The complex entanglement made her beauty reveal a kind of resolute cruelty. At this moment, at the entrance of the Bureau of Investigation, the drum of injustice was being beaten heavily, and the surrounding area was surrounded by a circle of commoners who were watching the commotion. The number of people who stopped to watch was increasing, and almost the entire entrance of the Bureau of Investigation was surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. On the left and right sides, there were two young women beating the drum of injustice, and both of them looked agitated. After an unknown amount of time, a person wearing an official's robe walked out and shouted, "Who is beating the drum of injustice?" "We servants are beating the drum of injustice on behalf of the Jiang family's eldest daughter. We plead darin for a fair trial to find the murderer of the late Furin's murder." Chapter 198. As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding crowd immediately went into an uproar. The farce of the Minister of State's Fu had been widely known in the capital a few years ago. At that time, Xia Yan's background had been very clean, and she was said to be a virtuous and talented person. Later on, it was revealed that she had a lack of morals and conduct, which made people loathe her. At this moment, when he heard the words of these two girls, it was as if a stone had been thrown into a calm lake, causing ripples to appear uncontrollably. Some of the older ones recalled the late Madam of the Minister of State's Fu, Zhao Mei. Speaking of which, those who had some impression of Zhao Mei actually had a very good impression of her. Zhao Mei was born beautiful, with a pure and kind temperament. When she married into the Minister of State's Fu, she often gave alms to the poor. She never despised the poor and loved the rich, nor did she put on the airs of a noblewoman. She was amiable and approachable. However, these good reputations were ultimately all attributed to the head of the Minister of State's Fu, giving Jiang Quan a lot of bargaining chips in his career. At that time, Jiang Quan's incorruptible reputation among the common people was not without Zhao Mei's contribution. However, later on, Zhao Mei gradually faded out of people's sight, and then a gentle, virtuous and talented woman, Xia Yan, appeared. In addition, Jiang Quan intentionally promoted her. Thus, people only remembered that the current Madam of the Minister of State's Fu was Xia Yan and not the original Zhao Mei. At this moment, when these two girls mentioned her, some people remembered that beautiful and kind young married woman. In the end, there were good people in the human heart, and there were people who spoke up to defend against injustice. Oh, which bastard wanted to harm the late madam? That late madam was a good and amiable person. The official stepped forward to take the complaint from Lien Xiao's hands and glanced at the crowd. Nowadays, Hong and Junju was very popular. She also had the great backing of Jinying Wangfu. Thus, upon hearing Jiang Ruan's name, he did not dare to slight her. He only shouted for the crowd not to make any noise, and walked inside with the complaint. Generally, it would take a day for the case department to start hearing a case. Usually, ordinary cases could be directly tried in the yamen. Unless the noble family had a gargantuan grievance to sue, and was afraid that the person being sued was too powerful, the yamen would intervene and the case would not be fair. Only then would the case be added to the case department. The case department could also choose whether or not to investigate this case. After all, there were too many twists and turns in the homes of rich and noble people, and if they were not careful, they would invite trouble upon themselves. However, since an official dared to resolve the complaint on his own, it was obvious that he had already received instructions from his superior. Since he had accepted the case, he was going to try it. The surrounding crowd knew that there would be a good show to watch tomorrow. Dewdrop still felt that it was not enough and deliberately said in a loud voice, "The concubine of the minister's Fu, Xia Yan, poisoned the mistress and cruelly harmed the D son and daughter. Her methods were vicious." As the head of the household, Minister Jiang was fully aware of the truth, yet he pretended to be deaf, and conveniently pushed the boat forward. The mistress died, but she said that she died of illness. I would like to trouble the case department to diligently try this case and restore the innocence and fairness of my young miss and madam. The crowd that was about to disperse immediately boiled up again. Dewdrop's words could be said to be a shocking scandal. In fact, in rich families, there were many cases of concubines plotting against the legal wife to get the position. However, if Jiang Quan knew everything that had happened but pretended to be deaf and mute, and even tacitly agreed with Xia Yan's methods, this would be the first time. Any official in the capital who had a good reputation and was not a fool would definitely not allow such a thing to happen. This was because, if it was exposed, it would be a huge stain on their reputation. The fight between the women in the inner courtyard was a fight for affection. Men should not get involved, especially when they were throwing stones at someone when they were down. If a man could treat his wife so cruelly, then what humanity was there left to speak of? Previously, Jiang Quan had only been a laughable person who could not handle the affairs of the inner courtyard. Now, with Dewdrop's words, Jiang Quan would henceforth become the representative of an ugly man in the capital. He was hypocritical, vicious in his heart, and had a kind of determination to abandon even his own flesh and blood. For a parent to be like him, it was really 1 in a million. Dewdrop and Lien Xiao looked at each other and smiled. They both felt refreshed, as if they had fiercely vented their resentment. They had been by Jiang Ruan's side for many years and were very clear about Jiang Quan's attitude towards Jiang Ruan. It was better not to have such a father. Zhao Mei had died unjustly, and Jiang Ruan and her sister's position in the minister's Fu had changed from being bullied and humiliated by others to not daring to be belittled. Now that they had gotten their revenge, they were naturally very happy. In a short period of time, the news of Hong and Junju suing her biological father had spread throughout the entire capital. Xia Yan and the Xia family were no more. Jiang Chao and Jiang Su were also dead. Naturally, the dead could not testify. However, the only Jiang Quan was still alive. This was tantamount to pointing all the spearheads at Jiang Quan. In the prince's Fu, Jiang Ruan looked at the sun in the sky. The snow had stopped early in the morning, and the sun had even risen a little. The weather was good. She slowly lifted her teacup and took a sip. Then, she said to Jin San and Tianzhu, who were beside her, "Let's go, it's almost time." Tianzhu got up and draped the silver rat fur cloak over her body. Then, she placed a heater in her hands before following her out the door. Today, the minister's Fu was exceptionally lively. Ever since Jiang Chao's death, no, it should be said that since many years ago, when Jiang Quan's career began to decline, the minister's Fu was no longer as bustling as before. At that time, Jiang Quan was like a fish in water in the court. Every day, there would be people who wanted to pay a visit. There were so many invitations in the room that the table could not fit them all. Jiang Quan discussed the current state of affairs with the high officials and nobles, while Xia Yan exchanged greetings and laughed with the noblewomen. They were all smooth and slick people, causing the entire Jiangfu to be filled with cheerful voices and laughter. At that time, Jiang Su Su was still a fairy who was untainted by the mundane world. In the garden, she could play the Chinese harp to the point of causing people to stop in their tracks and forget to leave. Many princes and nobles were bewitched by the beautiful sound of the harp. They would foolishly stand in the corner outside, listening to the music enter their ears and falling in love with the beauty. Jiang Chao, on the other hand, would always return from the imperial college, full of success, and talk with the nobles he had just befriended. At that time, the old Jiang madam was still alive and well. Every day, Second Yin Yang and Jiang Li dared not voice their anger at Xia Yan, and Jiang Dan timidly hid in her room. In the end, it could still be considered a scene of prosperity. Everyone guessed that the seemingly clean and upright Minister Fu would one day become a mainstay of the court. Because they were sufficiently loyal and did not make any mistakes. All of this prosperity seemed to have happened just yesterday. The liveliness had nothing to do with Jiang Yuan. It was as if the three of them, mother and sons, had always been strangers. Later on, when she came, the minister's Fu seemed to have been possessed by an evil spirit, and gradually declined. The glory of the past was long gone. Everyone said that it was not that the time had not yet come for revenge, but that the heavens were watching from above. The karma that the minister's Fu had sowed in the past had ultimately led to today's evil retribution. These past few years, the Jiang Fu had repeatedly met with mishaps. Today, Jiang Ruan's petition had torn the truth apart for everyone to see. The thoughts of the common people were simple and straightforward. Some people directly blocked the front door of the minister's Fu and threw eggs and vegetables at it. The Jiang Fu's imperial bodyguards came out to stop them, but they were also rained down with a torrent of abuse. They no longer dared to resist, and could only dejectedly close the front door under the crowd's anger. It was difficult to offend the anger of the masses. Just as the crowd was filled with righteous indignation, they saw a carriage slowly drive through the crowd, and the crowd automatically split into two. The carriage was exquisitely made, but it did not have a long lifespan. It had a low sense of beauty, and the coachman was actually a tall and handsome young man. With one look, one could tell that he was from a wealthy family. With just one look, the crowd seemed to be able to tell that the person in the carriage was either rich or of high status. Seeing that it was coming for the minister's Fu, they all fell silent and watched. The carriage finally stopped. The curtains were lifted, and two tall young women jumped out of the carriage. The two bowed and helped a woman out of the carriage. The woman was dressed in a crimson velvet embroidered coat and a bright jadeite crepe skirt. Such bright red and green colors were not gaudy, but instead had a kind of startling beauty. She was wearing a cloak woven with silver and silver rat fur, and in her hands was a warm stove. Her skin was as fair as jade, and her appearance was delicate and moving. She had combed her hair into a tranquil bun, which suppressed her beauty. Her pair of charming eyes were astonishing, but her gaze was dull, which caused that soul-stirring beauty to reveal a bit of austere and indifference. Someone in the crowd recognized her and exclaimed, "Isn't that the eldest daughter of the Jiang family, Hong and Junju?" Jiang family's daughter, this was her first title. Even if she was genieing Wang Fei and Hong and Junju, she was first and foremost the Jiang family's daughter. And now that she had appeared here, it was naturally thought-provoking. Everyone knew that she had sent her own maid to complain to the case department early this morning, so why had she come to the minister's Fu now? Everyone watched with great interest, wanting to see what she would do next. Jiang Yuan signaled Tianzhu with her eyes, and Tianzhu understood. She walked up to the minister's Fu's main door and lightly knocked 3 times. Her movements were polite and gentle, and it did not seem like she had come to find trouble. Instead, she seemed like a guest, extremely courteous. She then respectfully said, "May I trouble you to inform that my family's Wang Fei has returned to the Fu to return to peace today?" Ever since Jiang Ruan married into Jinying Wangfu, she had not even had the time to return to peace before she had been poisoned. Even so, the minister's Fu was not thousands of li away from Jinying Wangfu. If she had the intention, it would have been fine to send someone over to inquire. Who knew that Jiang Quan would actually be able to do it without saying a word? It was as if this daughter of his did not exist. At this moment, when Tianzhu mentioned returning to peace, the surrounding people all sucked in a breath of cold air. They had long known that the relationship between the Jiang family's daughter and Jiang Quan was not very close, but to be so cold and to only return to peace after being newly married for so long was really laughable. The people inside did not respond for a long time, so Tianzhu carefully retreated behind Jiang Ruan. The three of them then quietly stood at the entrance of the Jiang Fu. The surrounding crowd discussed in low voices, but they were also shocked by Jiang Ruan's coldness at this moment. This was because at this moment, her eyes were deep, as if she was not looking at the Jiang Fu, but rather looking at the long years that had passed through the Jiang Fu's main gate. Jiang Ruan's thoughts returned to her previous life. It was also on this snowy day that she had returned to the Jiang Fu from the rural residence for the first time. This was originally her own home, but it seemed as if she was living under someone else's roof. Standing at the entrance of the minister's Fu, she was both nervous and happy. She was dressed in tattered clothes, and the surrounding people were pointing at her, one after another guessing her identity. She felt so ashamed that she could not show her face. It was at this entrance that Xia Yan and Jiang Su Su, dressed up beautifully, came to welcome her. The more gentle and elegant they were, the more unbearably vulgar she was. Under this signboard of the Jiang Fu, the tightly shut main gate opened, and all kinds of hurt and humiliation poured out from inside. From the main gate of the Jiang Fu to the main gate of the palace, she cut an even more sorry figure each time. That scene from her previous life was like a joke, constantly reminding her of that unbearable past. And now, Jiang Ruan raised her head, and her gaze fell on the huge signboard of the minister's Fu. It was a signboard bestowed by the late emperor, Jiang Quan's pride, but at some point, it had already become covered in dust. In her previous life, what Xia Yan loved to do the most was to order the servants to wipe this signboard clean, as if it represented the glory of the Jiang family. Now, the Jiang family was on the verge of collapse. In this life, when she returned to the Jiang family, she had made a vow outside the main gate that she would slaughter all the people who had harmed her family in her previous life. She had planted a seed of vengeance here, and now, the seed had already broken through the soil and grown into a towering tree. With just a little more effort, she would be able to uproot this huge grave that had buried her and her family. After an unknown amount of time, the door creaked open. Behind the door, a man dressed in official robes slowly walked out. His face was gloomy, and he stared fiercely at Jiang Ruan. Perhaps Jiang Quan had just left court and had not had time to change his clothes, or perhaps he wanted to use the set of clothes to suppress Jiang Ruan's momentum. It was just that his appearance was very haggard. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly and politely greeted, "Father, long time no see." After a long time, Jiang Quan seemed to be a completely different person from the refined and decisive middle-aged man in Jiang Ruan's memory. He had lost a lot of weight, and his skin was very tanned. Both sides of his cheekbones were deeply sunken, and he was unusually thin. His entire person already showed signs of old age. Jiang Quan had always been a person who paid attention to his appearance. At that time, even when he was over 40 years old, he still looked like he was in his 30s, young and refined. Now, however, he had the appearance of a man who was not very good-looking, and perhaps even had some signs of declining. Only the indifference and harshness in his gaze was exactly the same as in her previous life. Jiang Quan sneered, "Gui Ning, do you still have any regard for my Jiang family?" Jiang Ruan nodded, "Of course, I have placed father in my heart, and I have never dared to forget him." How could she dare to forget the blood feud and humiliation? The corners of her lips rose slightly, "It's just that father doesn't seem to like this daughter of yours." The meaning behind these words was to accuse Jiang Quan of being a father who was not benevolent. Jiang Quan was flustered and said angrily, "Have I ever reduced your food and clothing expenses?" don't forget that I am still your father. Without me, how could you have grown so big? Now that your wings have hardened and you have someone to support you, you actually dare to make up stories about your father. Where did you learn these wild rules from in the mountains? Jiang Quan had always maintained his status as a scholar, so he had always spoken very politely. Outsiders had never seen him curse people in such a vulgar manner. At this moment, he was probably very anxious, so he did not choose his words carefully, which allowed the surrounding crowd to see his true appearance. Without father, there would naturally be no me. Jiang Wan said indifferently, thanks to father's good fortune, when mother was still alive, eldest brother and I were only able to see father a few dozen times a year. However, Xia Yinyang's second younger sister and second older brother were always with father. Second brother could enter father's study, but eldest brother even had to be personally invited by mother. Second sister had the best nannies in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, while I was personally taught by mother, but mother came from a military family and was completely ignorant of these things. Father, don't tell me that you want to say that it is because you sympathize with mother's motherly love for me and eldest brother to always stay by her side? These words were full of sarcasm. Jiang Quan's face slowly turned red, and he immediately opened his mouth to refute this. However, staying together with mother is really very pleasant, so these are all nothing. The zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting are not my interests, and eldest brother has yet to learn the ways of a civil official. All of this is thanks to father's foresight. A trace of ridicule flashed through Jiang Ruan's eyes as she continued, it's just that eldest brother was in a critical condition and wanted to call for a doctor at night. However, Xia Yinyang said that father was already asleep and that they would see him tomorrow. As a result, mother could only warm eldest brother with her own body for the entire night. If not for eldest brother's good fortune, he would not be able to be safe and sound today. Father, how do you explain this? Without waiting for Jiang Quan to speak, Jiang Ruan smiled and said, father is busy with official business, so I don't have to worry. So when mother was seriously ill, father did not come. When mother was on her deathbed, father also did not come. Only on the day that Xia Yinyang was placed on the throne did father come. Father pulled second brother and second sister and smiled very happily. Eldest brother left home in anger, but I was sent to the rural residence. She laughed lightly, father, do you remember why you were sent to the rural residence? Because there was a Taoist priest who said that I was the bane of heaven, and that I would bring misfortune upon my parents. However, 5 years later, when I returned to the capital, that Taoist priest repeated the same trick and was seen through as a swindler. Father, do you still remember who the employer behind that Taoist priest was? It was father's favorite concubine, and later, mother, Xia Yinyang. She spoke in a drawn-out manner with a sigh, but the people who heard her felt their hearts skip a beat. To not even let a little girl off, this Xia Yan's mind was a little too vicious. Father, do you want to say that you don't know anything about this matter? Then I'm afraid that there are too many things that father doesn't know. For example, on the day that my eldest brother returned to the capital, he was ambushed in the forest. Unexpectedly, they wanted to put him to death. If General Guan had not rushed to the rescue at that time, I'm afraid that the odds would have been against him. Father, do you know who the person behind this is? Naturally, father does not know, because that person is also father's favorite concubine, Xia Yinyang. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, father, you want to be an upright and honest high-ranking official, but you can't even recognize the person by your bedside. As a daughter, seeing this, my heart really aches. Some of the people around them sneered, while others pointed out, so it turns out that the minister's fu is such a tiger's den and dragon's pool. No wonder General Jiang wants to enter the military. Otherwise, how could he protect himself and younger sister? I'm afraid that he would have long since eaten so many bones. Xia Yan's mind was vicious to the point that it made people's hair stand on end. Unexpectedly, she did not even want to let Jiang Xinji and Jiang Yuan off. It was unknown how much old enmity she had with Zhao Mei. If Jiang Quan were to say that he was completely unaware of such a vicious woman, then he would really be underestimating this official of the third rank. Even if he said it, no one would believe it. It was nothing more than turning a blind eye to it. If one were to say that Jiang Quan had taken advantage of Zhao Mei's death to push the boat along with the current, then he would have a reputation as a cruel and unscrupulous person. However, even her own son and daughter acted as if they did not know anything. This was really puzzling. It was said that even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. Could it be that Jiang Quan's heart was made of iron? You! What nonsense are you spouting? Jiang Quan flew into a rage out of humiliation. He was also afraid that Jiang Ruan would reveal even more secrets. You speak nonsense without any evidence. Who taught you to say such things, to humiliate my minister's Fu? What is his purpose? Jiang Quan was an old fox after all. He very quickly thought of the questions that aroused everyone's doubts. As the child of the minister's Fu, Jiang Ruan naturally would not accuse her father for no reason. However, what if there was someone guiding her from behind? Jiang Ruan was now married to Jinying Wang, so the person behind her naturally referred to Xiao Xiao. A trace of anger flashed quickly in Tian Zhu and Jin San's eyes. Even at this time, Jiang Quan still wanted to make a false accusation. This was really an unforgivable sin. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. Father, this is not important. At that time, Xia Yinyang ordered someone to drug my mother. Naturally, I also have evidence. My mother told me since I was a child not to recklessly accuse others. Suddenly, there was another burst of laughter. Jiang Quan thought that Jiang Ruan was only scaring him. So many years had passed, and at that time, Jiang Ruan was only a child. She did not know anything. Now that Xia Yan was also dead, where would there be any evidence? Jiang Quan was not worried, but after Jiang Ruan's disturbance, he felt that he had lost all face today. Immediately, he was unable to restrain his anger as he said, "You really want to do this? Evil girl, you actually dare to accuse your biological father. Where do you place the word filial piety? Where do you place me, your father? In this world, no matter what, when the word filial piety was pressed down, a few layers of skin would be crushed off." Chapter 199. Jiang Ruan observed with admiration. Beauty, especially from a person whom she did not dislike, would never make people unhappy. A certain person who pretended to be indifferent finally could not stand that overbearing gaze. After enduring it for a while, he finally put down his book and raised his eyes, meeting Jiang Ruan's gaze for the first time since returning to the room. Jiang Quan gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging. If not for the fact that they were in public, he would probably have killed Jiang Ruan. Not only that, but Jiang Ruan's actions also caused a trace of panic to arise in his heart. Jiang Ruan's gaze was filled with indifference and hatred, as if she did not care at all whether he was a member of the Jiang family or not. As she was thinking, Xiao Xiao lightly patted her hand. Jiang Ruan raised her head to look at him. Xiao Xiao walked forward unhurriedly. His black clothes did not seem out of place next to Jiang Ruan's crimson dress. The intertwining of black and red actually revealed a kind of cool and elegant splendor. Jiang Quan did not want to directly clash with him, but he really could not swallow this anger. In an unfriendly tone, he said, "Does Xiao Wangye have something to warn this old official? This old official only teaches his own children, so Xiao Wangye does not need to worry about household matters." Jin San and Tian Zhu quietly stood behind Jiang Ruan. Their gazes slightly wavered, but no one stepped forward to stop him. Jiang Ruan had already told them about her plans. This was the reason why she did not immediately tell Xiao Xiao. Once Xiao Xiao knew that she had made this decision, he would definitely stop her. Although Jin San was Xiao Xiao's man, he now wholeheartedly obeyed Jiang Ruan. As a husband, Xiao Xiao naturally had to protect his wife. However, Jin San also knew that Jiang Ruan's method was the best. That was the courage to announce to the world that she had severed ties with the minister's Fu. Jiang Quan wanted to use blood ties to threaten her, but from now on, it would be impossible. She wanted to sever the last bit of connection with the minister's Fu. This might require a lot of courage, but it could also be seen how much she hated the fact that her surname was Jiang. Housekeeper Lin had just returned to the small kitchen when Jean San ran out, sweating profusely. "Hey, old Lin, the medicine for young madam is ready. Let Lian Xiao send it over." Lu Zhu came back to empty the bowl and happened to hear Jean San's words. She could not help but be shocked and asked, "What medicine?" Even after many years, when the people of the capital talked about the blossoming of blood in the heavy snow, they could not help but sigh. In the snow, the red-clothed woman's face was as beautiful as a flower, and the two men's cold and resolute backs were deeply engraved in everyone's mind. That unintentionally revealed elegance was enough to be talked about for a lifetime, and it would never fade no matter what. He did not say anything. His tightly pursed lips looked serious and handsome. The young girls around him recognized him and started to discuss, "Isn't that Jinying Wang? He must have come specially to support Wang Fei this time." The surrounding people immediately fell silent and stared at Jiang Yuan in disbelief. There were many women in the world with strong and resolute temperament, but none of them were as resolute and decisive as she was. Jiang Yuan was the first since the great Jin dynasty had established its territory. Jiang Yuan frowned. She had never thought that Jiang Xing would come. His actions were understandable. However, as the commander-in-chief of the army, his actions today would inevitably be criticized by his colleagues in the court in the future. If someone deliberately wanted to add insult to injury, perhaps they would use this matter as a ruse. Thinking of this, she could not help but blame herself. She should have found an excuse to hide it from him. She did not want the news to be leaked so quickly. No matter how the brocade guards mingled in private, Jiang Yuan and Xiao Xiao were completely unaware. After Xiao Xiao entered the room, he did not say a word and only sat in front of the table looking for a book to read. No matter how Jiang Yuan thought about it, she felt that he was angry. However, Xiao Xiao usually had an expression regardless of whether he was angry or not. Although she could not see it, she could still feel his displeasure. Tianzhu rolled her eyes at him and said, "Young madam is someone worthy of my admiration." As expected, the coldness on Xiao Xiao's face eased a little. Jiang Yuan took the medicine, and when Xiao Xiao averted his eyes, Jiang Yuan obediently drank the medicine. Jean San thought for a while, then took out a few pearls and threw them into the bowl. He said, "I'll buy young lord. Young madam isn't an ordinary woman. I have a feeling that young madam will definitely take advantage of young lord." Hey, why are you guys looking at me? I'm also a woman. My woman's intuition tells me that. That's awesome. To be so protective of his own younger sister, no wonder he is the war god of the great Jin dynasty. Wrong, someone retorted, that Jinying Wang is a heartless and cold person. Look at the way he treats Wang Fei, it is too gentle. There's no such thing as being cold. Jiang Xing didn't want to return to the minister's mansion. The new mansion that the emperor had bestowed upon him hadn't been built yet, so he decided to go to the general's mansion. Now, he was on good terms with Xiao Guang. Whenever they talked about the art of war, it was as if they were old friends. After Jiang Xing left, Jiang Yuan and Xiao Xiao were left alone in the carriage. Xiao Xiao did not say a word. It was unknown what he was thinking, but it made Jiang Yuan feel a little guilty. Fine, as you wish. Jean Eyre waved his hand and said, "I'll buy young madam to take the initiative to reconcile." As he took out a banknote and threw it into the bowl, he said, "In any case, young lord is a man. No matter how much he dotes on his wife, a man will always have self-esteem. How can he take the initiative to coax a woman? He will spoil her. No matter what, he is still our young lord. When have you ever seen the young lord take the initiative to apologize to someone?" Jiang Yuan saw that his attitude had softened and hurriedly said, "I have thought about it. I am not a fool. If so much blood were to flow out, wouldn't it cost me my life? My life was saved by you and your teacher with great difficulty. How can I lose it because of an unimportant minister's foo? I am not someone who does not have a sense of propriety. Didn't you see the chicken blood? That was all prepared by me. I know how to protect myself. What illness? Sick. Housekeeper Lin was momentarily sluggish. Then, his face contorted. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He stamped his feet and said, "That was the medicine that I asked divine Dr. Xia to brew for young lord. Today, I wanted to brew it for young lord to drink, but I did not expect that young madam would be injured. Ah, now is not the time to drink that medicine. Ah, no, I can't tell young lord. What should I do? I will go out and hide. Jin-san, if young lord asks, just say that I have a cold. Don't slip up. Ah, Wan is my wife." Xiao Xiao did not seem to hear Jiang Quan's words and said indifferently, "Husband and wife are one. If she wants to return Minister Zhang's blood, this prince will do it." Just as he finished speaking, he saw an exquisite dagger slide out of his sleeve. He played with it in his hand and lightly cut the back of his hand. "This is the medicine that divine Dr. Xia prescribed for madam." Jin-san said, "Wasn't young madam injured today? What is that empty bowl in your hand?" Xiao Xiao stared at her indifferently. "You never thought that I would be worried." A trace of disdain flashed across Jiang Xing's face. This kind of father, even if he did not want it, it would be fine. Ever since he was born, he had not fulfilled his duties as a father for a single day. What he had given the three of them, mother and son, was only endless humiliation and pain. Now, he actually wanted to use the word filial piety to overwhelm Jiang Yuan. He only felt sorry for his younger sister, who had been forced to the point that she did not hesitate to harm her own body in order to draw a clear line between herself and the Jiang Fu. Since Jiang Yuan wanted to do this, how could he not agree? Jiang Xing already had an excellent reputation among the common people. At this moment, when he said these words, his expression was naturally open and aboveboard, and his action of protecting his younger sister from being wronged caused everyone to exclaim in their hearts. If one were to say that Jiang Yuan's actions just now had made everyone feel that she had gone a little overboard. But when it was Jiang Xing, it was very different. Everyone felt that for this god of war, who was a fair and just gentleman, to be so disgusted, the minister's fu was indeed not a clean place. They were afraid that they had really gone too far. But they did not know when it had started, but the cats and dogs that were kept in the fu had also grown sharp claws and teeth. It was probably when she had returned from the rural residence that her temperament had become eccentric. She seemed to be steady and calm, and no longer relied on the entire Jiang Fu as she had in the past. Jiang Quan did not care. Even if the matter of the Xia family and Jiang Su seemed to be related to Jiang Yuan, he had always firmly believed that no cat or dog would personally destroy their own nest. In the end, Jiang Yuan needed a maiden family. Besides Jiang Xing, her only family was him, Jiang Quan. And as long as there was this bit of kinship, Jiang Yuan would never be able to stir up much of a storm. As long as filial piety was at the tip of her tongue, Jiang Yuan would forever stand at the disadvantage of justice. How could a person who could even disregard life and death be trapped by the small word filial piety? At this moment, Jiang Quan knew that Jiang Yuan was not going to turn back. The light burning in her eyes was hatred. She hated this minister's fu, and indeed, she deeply loathed the blood that flowed in her body with the surname Jiang. At this moment, Jiang Quan was actually speechless. He did not know what to do, and could only stare at Jiang Yuan without blinking. No. Jiang Yuan's words stopped in her mouth. Admittedly, Xiao Xiao had done this for her, but more importantly, it was to prevent anyone from using this matter to pressure Jiang Xing in the future. Because of Jinying Wang, Jiang Xing would not become the target of everyone's attacks. At least, the people under heaven would not first think of the overbearing siblings. Housekeeper Lin stared blankly and his face immediately scrunched up, injured again. "Oh, my young madam, why are you injured every day? If the Lord and Madam in heaven were to see this, they would blame our Jinying Wang Fu for not taking good care of you. Jin-san Tianzhu, do you not want to stay in the genie guard? If you can't even protect young madam well, how can you take on missions in the future? Sooner or later, the reputation of the genie guard will be ruined in the hands of you two girls. Xiao Xiao pursed his lips, his face still cold. Although when he heard Jiang Ruan mention the chicken blood incident, he was both angry and amused. What he remembered more was the shock and heartache he felt when he and Jiang Xing rushed over and saw the bright bloodstains on the snow-covered ground. That moment of overwhelming worry. Jiner investigated it. Xiao Xiao answered indifferently, still not shifting his gaze to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Quan was almost thrown off his feet by Jiang Xing. He looked at the tall young man in front of him. In his memory, the young child who was always timid and wanted to curry favor with him had already disappeared. Today, Jiang Xing's ability was completely revealed. As a court official, even he had to be awed by Jiang Xing's prestige. But these two siblings had joined hands to deal with him, which was really a big taboo for Jiang Quan. He clutched his chest with one hand and panted as he pointed at Jiang Xing, treason and heresy. Treason and heresy. This was clearly anger. Seeing Xiao Xiao's awkwardness, Jiang Ruan moved her chair closer to the table. With one hand on the table and the other supporting her cheek, she was practically half lying on the table as she stared unblinkingly at Xiao Xiao. The young man's expression was indifferent, as if he was not affected in the slightest. His long eyelashes drew a graceful arc, and his eyes were as deep as the vast sea of stars. Only his side profile was so handsome that he did not seem like someone from the opposite world. All along, Jiang Quan had regarded Jiang Ruan as a dispensable daughter. She was Zhao Mei's daughter, which was like a constant reminder of those oppressive days when he had been suppressed by others. He loathed Jiang Ruan and deliberately ignored her. He knew that Jiang Ruan's temperament was soft and easy to manipulate, just like the cats and dogs that were kept in the Fu. Usually, they were only kept for the sake of being put to good use one day. As long as he treated her a little more gently, they would happily come up and wag their tails. Jiang Ruan saw that he was not speaking and knew that this person was extremely angry today. She wanted to say a few more words of comfort, but then she saw Lu Zhu walking in with a bowl of medicine and said, "The medicine that housekeeper Lin ordered is ready. Young madam, quickly drink it while it's hot." She also wanted to ease the stiff atmosphere between the two of them. She thought that mentioning Jiang Ruan's injury would make Xiao Xiao's heart ache a little, and perhaps he would not be so angry at her own Mississippi. Lu Zhu looked at her blankly. "Just now, there was a bowl of medicine here. I thought it was for Miss, so I brought it into the room for Madam to drink." But how could she dare? Jiang Quan's eyes were somewhat red, like a trapped beast on the verge of death. That woman's smiling face was like the legendary red spider lily, beautiful yet cruel, as if the skin of a beauty had grown out of eerie white bones. The blood on her wrist dripped noiselessly into the snow-covered ground, but she did not seem to feel the slightest bit of pain. "Are you angry?" Jiang Ruan asked. "What's the matter?" Jean San turned to look at housekeeper Lin. "Old Lin, is there someone else in the Fu who is sick?" When she raised her eyes again, Jiang Ruan's gaze had already regained its calm. She looked at Jiang Quan, who already did not know how to end the situation, and said with a faint smile, "Father, after this blood has been repaid, we brother and sister will no longer have any relationship with the Jiang family. From now on, we will no longer be members of the Jiang family. The benevolence of father and son has been exhausted, and we shall sever all ties." At the side, Genie silently shouldered his knife and was about to leave when he was pulled back by Jean C. Hey, you should also say something, Genie, which one do you want to buy?" Genie looked at the bowl and silently fished out a gold ingot from his sleeve. He only said 3 words, "I support my master." Then, he turned around and carried his knife away. "I should not have kept it from you." Without waiting for Xiao Xiao to speak, Jiang Ruan took the initiative to say, "Today, I only cared about myself and did not consider your feelings. I am sorry." She sighed, "But Xiao Xiao, if I had told you about this, you would certainly not have allowed it. I originally thought that it would not be too late to tell you after what was done was done. I was wrong. I am used to dealing with these matters alone and forgot that you are my husband." I never thought that you would be worried about me. She thought about it, this matter was still her own fault. Anyone would be unhappy to be kept in the dark by their own wife like this. She had always been very magnanimous in these matters, and when she knew that she was in the wrong, she wanted to admit it. However, Xiao Xiao did not speak to her, and Jiang Yuan was in a difficult position. She only felt that at this moment, Xiao Xiao was extremely similar to Xian Pei, who had quarreled with her in her previous life. However, as long as Xian Pei was angry, he would make a few sweet pastries and praise him for being obedient. Now, she was going to tell Xiao Xiao that he was his little darling. Jiang Yuan shivered. The crowd was quiet for a few seconds, and suddenly, someone clapped and shouted, "Good! You're a real man. Truly loyal." Jean Eyre gave a thumbs up and was slapped aside by Steward Lin. When he saw the gold, silver, and jewels in the bowl, he immediately flew into a rage. I already said that gambling in the Wang Fu is not allowed, and it has caused such a bad atmosphere. I want my master to deduct your monthly allowance. Quickly go and brew the medicine. With great difficulty, they returned to the Wang Fu. As soon as Xiao Xiao entered the Fu, Steward Lin came to greet him. He was about to speak when Xiao Xiao said, "Young madam has suffered a knife injury, let Xia Wu brew some medicine." "I'll bet on my master." Tian Zhu was usually a rather proper person, and basically, she would not participate in such a gamble. However, today, for the first time, she took out a silver yuan from her sleeve. Young madam is such a patient person, and master dotes on her very much. Naturally, he cannot bear to be angry with her all the time. As long as young madam furrows her brows, all of master's anger will disappear. When Jean Eyre heard this, he burst out laughing and said, "Tian Zhu, you are young madam's maidservant, but now, your eyes are filled with young madam's shadow. Back then, I didn't see you worshipping the young master so much." These words were full of sarcasm, but just as she finished speaking, Jiang Xing took a big step forward. Although he had inherited Zhao Mei's bright and handsome appearance, the longer he had lived in the army these past few years, the more he had tempered a steel-like cold and resolute temperament. At this moment, in the snowstorm, he was like a statue, and immediately, like a mountain, stood in front of Jiang Yuan to protect her. He stared fixedly at Jiang Quan, and Jiang Quan could not help but feel a little guilty under this sharp, sword-like gaze. Jiang Xing suddenly laughed and said, "Younger sister, why didn't you call me when you were doing this? I am also a son of the Jiang family, and half of the Jiang family's blood flows in my body. Similarly, I am also extremely disgusted by this. Since I am a man, I will definitely not let my own younger sister bleed." He cupped his hands towards the surrounding crowd. "I would like to trouble everyone to be a witness. My younger sister's blood, I will return it on her behalf." Before he finished speaking, another black silhouette appeared by her side. Xiao Xiao's gaze was unusually cold, and he only glanced at Jiang Quan indifferently. He did not say anything, but Jiang Quan felt a deep sense of pressure. He turned his head, and without saying a word, he pulled Jiang Ruan's hand, took the medicine bottle and bandage from the secret guard, and carefully applied the medicine to Jiang Yuan. When Jiang Yuan saw that Xiao Xiao had rushed over so quickly, she could not help but feel a little guilty. However, she was determined to succeed in today's matter, and even if Xiao Xiao was there, he would not be able to change her resolve. She shook her head and said, "There is no need to trouble yourself, I will eventually return half of his blood." Jiang Yuan nodded, "Today's matter was my fault. I should not have hidden it from you." She admitted her mistake very quickly, and there was almost no hesitation. She had always spoken directly in front of people she was familiar with, and would not hide anything. Two men stood side by side in the snow, and the ground was covered in a dense spray of blood. One was beautiful beyond compare, cold and elegant, and the other was bright and handsome, firm and resolute like a mountain. The scene was surprisingly harmonious. Heavy snow fell silently, and among the crowd, there was an emotional woman whose eyes were wet. She covered her mouth and murmured, "To have such a brother, to have such a husband, what else can one ask for?" Old Lin broke out in a cold sweat. Who would have thought that the medicine that he had specially instructed Xia Wu to prescribe, because Xiao Xiao's body was weak, would now be used by Jiang Yuan? He did not know what effect that medicine would have on a woman. Today, it could be said that he had poked a big hole in the basket, but when he thought about it, why did he feel some anticipation? Later, she had asked Tianzhu Jin-san to take advantage of the time when he was supporting Xiao Xiao and Jiang Xinji to stuff the blood packet in. In the end, half of the blood had flowed out. Jiang Quan was so angry that he was in a complete mess, but there was nothing he could do. He could only watch helplessly as they left behind a sentence of "no more relations," and left in the carriage. Jiang Yuan slowly lowered her eyes. She did not feel the slightest bit of pain from the wound on her hand, but her heart felt sour and astringent. Two such outstanding men in this world had bled for her. In this life, what had she done to deserve them to make such sacrifices for her? As he finished speaking, Jiang Xinji did not hesitate to snatch the dagger from Jiang Ruan's hand and ruthlessly slash the back of his hand. His attack was heavier than Jiang Ruan's, and blood almost spurted out. Jiang Ruan could not help but be startled, and subconsciously reached out to bandage his wound. Jin San and Tianzhu silently looked away. However, Jiang Ruan was not in the mood to bicker with Steward Lin. She only lowered her head and followed Xiao Xiao back to the house. Jean Eyre jumped down from the tree and said, "Is Master angry with young madam? You don't look happy." After a while, she finally stood up and walked to Xiao Xiao's side. Xiao Xiao did not even raise his head, and his gaze only fell on the page in front of him. Jiang Yuan moved a chair from the side and sat beside him. She said softly, "Xiao Xiao, how did you know that I went to the minister's fu?" Jean C had just finished nibbling on a fruit and casually wiped his mouth. When he heard Jean Eyre's words, he immediately took out a silver bowl from his bosom and said, "Let's bet, let's bet. Let's bet on who will take the initiative to admit their mistake first." Until the bloodstains on the ground almost dyed the small area where Jiang Yuan was standing red, and her face became increasingly pale, she suddenly heard the hurried sound of horse hooves approaching from afar. A figure, mixed with the snowflakes stirred up by the wind, appeared in front of Jiang Yuan in a flash. That person had probably just rushed over from the military camp. He was still dressed in military attire, and his brows were cold and hard, full of hardships. Jiang Xing pulled Jiang Yuan over and angrily said, "Yuan, what are you doing?" Xiao Xiao looked down. "You did not do anything wrong." That night, when Xiao Xiao and Jiang Xing returned, their faces were only slightly pale, but nothing else could be seen. Both of them had gone through so many years of hard work, and they also had a foundation in martial arts. Even though half of their bodies were blood and flesh, how could they be sure when they investigated? It was originally just a gimmick, so it was better to know when to stop. Jiang Yuan never made a losing trade. Earlier, she had already stored some blood packets made of chicken blood in her sleeves. Even if Xiao Xiao and Jiang Xing did not come in the end, she still had a way to escape unscathed. Chapter 200. After Jiang Yuan took the medicine, she wanted to go to bed early to rest. Who knew that when she reached the bed, she could not fall asleep? She only felt her heart become restless for no reason. It was originally a cold winter day, but unexpectedly, she did not feel cold at all. Instead, a fine layer of sweat formed on her forehead. She originally thought it was a problem with the herbs, so she didn't take it to heart. She just turned over and pulled the blanket down. Who knew that after a while, it actually became even hotter? Not only that, but there was also an unfamiliar tide of emotions surging in her body. She vaguely guessed something, but she felt that it was inconceivable. He wanted to sit up, but the moment he moved, his body felt strangely limp. "Xiao Xiao." Jiang Yuan could not help but call out to him. Even she herself was startled by the sound of her voice. She was charming, gentle, and beautiful. When Xiao Xiao heard this, he raised his eyes and looked over. When he saw Jiang Yuan's appearance, he was slightly startled. Putting down the book, he walked to the bedside and sat down. Although his expression was still cold, he couldn't help but ask with concern, "What's wrong?" Seeing that Jiang Ruan's face was extremely red, he frowned and stretched out his hand towards Jiang Ruan's forehead. Xiao Xiao's hand was ice-cold and his joints were slender. As he caressed Jiang Ruan's head, Jiang Ruan could not help but let out a comfortable sigh. She was startled and felt that she was too ashamed to face Xiao Xiao. However, her body was more honest than her mind. At this moment, her whole body was burning hot. Indeed, she was greedy for Xiao Xiao's cold body. She subconsciously snuggled up to Xiao Xiao. "You!" Xiao Xiao suddenly withdrew his hand and grasped Jiang Ruan's wrist to feel her pulse. Jiang Ruan's body trembled. Xiao Xiao's movements paused slightly, as if he had suddenly discovered something. A pair of pitch-black eyes looked towards Jiang Ruan. When Jiang Ruan saw his expression, she could roughly guess what had happened. For a moment, she was embarrassed, but she couldn't resist the urge to rub herself against Xiao Xiao. She could only clench her teeth and desperately suppress the anger in her heart. Xiao Xiao withdrew his hand, his voice cold and emotionless. "I'll go call Xia Qing over." Even so, there was still a trace of anger in his words. Regardless of the mastermind behind today's incident, disregarding Jiang Ruan's body like this, even if it was a prank, it was still too much. "Xiao Xiao." Jiang Ruan grabbed him. Actually, she didn't use much strength. At this moment, all her thoughts were on fighting the flames in her body, so she didn't have any extra strength. Xiao Xiao's footsteps paused. He turned around and said, "It's nothing. I just made a mistake." He was probably still consoling her. Jiang Ruan's eyes were half opened in a daze. At this moment, she seemed to have split into two people. One of her body was surging with unfamiliar feelings, unable to control herself, while the other was incomparably clear-headed as she looked at everything in front of her. The young man in front of her was always dressed in black, which made his originally cold temperament seem to be coated with a layer of frost, as if he had abandoned all desires. It was really hard to imagine that there would be such a cold man in this world. At this moment, his face was handsome. His thin lips were tightly pursed and his brows were slightly furrowed. He looked extremely delicious. Delicious? Jiang Ruan grabbed the corner of his clothes and spat out 3 words with difficulty, "Don't go. Don't worry." Xiao Xiao didn't seem to understand what she meant. Seeing her determined look, he was afraid that she would fall, so he sat down on the couch and said in a low voice, "I'll be back soon." Jiang Ruan was somewhat annoyed. She had already made her words so clear, but Xiao Xiao was still so stupid. At this moment, her whole body was as hot as a soldering iron. As soon as she got close to Xiao Xiao, the man's ice-cold and chilly aura almost made her unable to restrain herself from sticking to him. In fact, Jiang Ruan really did stick to him. She wrapped her arms around Xiao Xiao's neck and, somewhat impatiently, rubbed against his body. Xiao Xiao's fair and handsome face immediately blushed. He somewhat wanted to push Jiang Ruan away, but he only said, "Be obedient and let go." The next moment, he felt his body heavily hit by someone. Caught off guard, he was knocked down onto the couch. Immediately after, a soft body pounced on him. With great difficulty, Jiang Ruan propped herself up and glared fiercely at him. Her face was already flushed red from the effects of the medicine, and her pair of charming eyes seemed to be able to drip water. Her voice was even softer than a puddle of water, yet she still had to bring out an imposing aura. She practically roared, "I already told you not to leave." However, at this moment, no matter how loud her voice was, in Xiao Xiao's ears, it only sounded like she was acting coquettishly. Xiao Xiao quietly stared at Jiang Ruan, who was leaning on him, and said in a faint voice, "Do you know what you are doing?" Jiang Ruan's gaze was as fierce as a hungry wolf's. She had a beautiful face that could turn all living things upside down, and her moist eyes were like a little fox in the forest. If one was not a saint, it was feared that they would also be somewhat moved. Xiao Xiao's body was indeed ice-cold. Lying on him like this was like lying on a block of ice. Jiang Ruan sighed in satisfaction. She naturally knew what her actions meant. Her relationship with Xiao Xiao had become somewhat unusual after the antidote was removed. However, she had always been a person who warmed up slowly. If she continued to follow her own temperament, she did not know how long she would have to wait. She and Xiao Xiao were husband and wife. More importantly, she did not reject more intimate actions with Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao was too much of a gentleman. If he had not obtained her consent, he would absolutely not have taken the initiative to propose sleeping with her. And with her temperament, it was assumed that she would not have said it out loud. It was better to take advantage of this opportunity, as if to give herself a way out. If she missed this opportunity, she did not know if she would have the courage to take the initiative to express her attitude to Xiao Xiao in the future. It was rare for her mind to be so clear at this time, but when she met Xiao Xiao's indifferent pitch-black eyes, she felt as if she was being sucked in. Jiang Yuan steeled her heart and suddenly smiled, saying, "Do this." As she spoke, she raised her hand and used all her strength to pull off Xiao Xiao's belt. Xiao Xiao's body stiffened, and the suspicious flush on his face became clearer. He did not know why, but the ice-cold body below him did not seem to be as cold as before. Jiang Yuan sat on him and looked at him condescendingly. "You and I are husband and wife. I am doing what a wife should do." Xiao Xiao's long eyelashes trembled slightly. His gaze was sharp, but his tone was gentle. "Wan, do you not regret it?" Jiang Yuan did not speak. She slowly bent down and mustered up her courage to nibble on his neck. She had always been a person who knew how to restrain herself. This drug was actually not as strong as she had imagined, at least it was not as heavy as the last time. But now, she could only be considered to be pretending to be stupid to take this opportunity. Fortunately, at this moment, her face was already red, so her special emotions could not be seen. Xiao Xiao narrowed his eyes, and his whole body seemed to have tightened into a ball. Jiang Yuan was still like a kitten, carelessly arching around his neck. Jiang Yuan originally did not have much experience. She had probably learned this from the booklet she had read before entering the palace in her previous life. She carelessly kissed him and thought about what she should do with her hand. Before she could think of anything, her hand was caught in an ice-cold palm. Jiang Yuan slightly propped herself up, somewhat puzzled. However, she did not expect that when she leaned over to look at Xiao Xiao with her snow-white skin and beautiful face, her jet-black long hair hung behind her back, and a lock of it mischievously blocked in front of her. Her charming eyes were like silk, and her cherry lips were delicious. It was as if she had fallen into the world of mortals, and each and every movement was captivating and soul-stealing. Jiang Yuan had always known that she was beautiful, and she expected that at this moment, she would not be lacking either. However, she did not expect Xiao Xiao's actions. Xiao Xiao stared at her closely, his gaze very deep, and the affection contained in his jet-black long eyes seemed to be able to swallow a person. Jiang Yuan paused, and suddenly, as if provoking him, pinched his waist. She immediately felt Xiao Xiao's body tense up. She was secretly pleased with herself, but the next moment, she felt the world spin, and her position with Xiao Xiao's had reversed. Xiao Xiao looked down at her condescendingly, one hand propped up on the side of her pillow. His features were cold, and his jet-black eyes were like a deep pool. At this moment, the pool water was surging, and unfamiliar emotions were overwhelming. His breath was scorching, and a dangerous aura assaulted her senses. Jiang Yuan sensitively sensed that something was wrong. She only felt that Xiao Xiao today was very different from the past. Under such a direct and forceful gaze, she actually felt a little guilty for a moment. Immediately, she struggled to push Xiao Xiao away. However, at this moment, she did not have any strength, and she was already sweating all over. A woman's charm was inadvertently revealed, and the flirtatious look in the corner of her eyes was truly admirable. Xiao Xiao's voice suddenly became low and hoarse, as if he was trying his best to restrain himself. He said, "Don't move." Jiang Yuan immediately reacted, and at that moment, she did not dare to move recklessly. Originally, she had wanted to quickly resolve this matter, and today, she had taken advantage of the courage that she had gathered with great difficulty to be so bold. Who knew that now, it was difficult to get off the tiger's back? At this moment, the nervousness in her heart had long since drowned out the original tide of passion. However, as it neared the critical juncture, she began to sober up. Just as she was hesitating about what to do next, Xiao Xiao suddenly turned over and sat up. He had decided to stop here. Jiang Ruan's heart inexplicably felt somewhat disappointed. However, she saw that after Xiao Xiao sat up, he had indeed taken off his boots and jacket. He turned his head and met Jiang Ruan's disappointed gaze. After a slight pause, he could not help but laugh. Jiang Ruan stared blankly for a moment, and then immediately felt angry, as if she had been caught red-handed. Why should she be disappointed in this kind of thing? It was as if she had coveted Xiao Xiao's beauty, and was just about to find an excuse when she saw that Xiao Xiao had already leaned over. Her body did not dare to move for a moment, and immediately after, her lips were blocked by a warm and soft object. Jiang Ruan could clearly hear the sound of her own and Xiao Xiao's heartbeats. She had probably never done such an intimate thing with anyone in her previous and current lives. This kiss was extremely long, and when he released her, Jiang Ruan actually only cared about breathing for a moment, and her body had already turned soft. At this moment, Jiang Ruan's lips were even more tender and luscious, like red cherry blossoms in May, fresh and beautiful. Her head was slightly tilted back, and her long, jet-black hair was spread out on the bright red pillow. Her eyes were charming, her eyebrows were curved, her lips were red, and her teeth were white. Jiang Ruan's face became increasingly hot under his gaze, but she did not want Xiao Xiao to see that she was feeling guilty. She only wanted to blow out the lamp, but she did not expect that just as she moved slightly, Xiao Xiao would press down on her again. His expression was not as cold as it usually was. In both her previous and current lives, although she had experienced all kinds of storms, this was probably the first time she had experienced such a thing between a man and a woman. It was unfamiliar and nervous, and the initial bold provocation had completely dissipated. However, there was no turning back, and at this moment, it was naturally impossible for Xiao Xiao to shout for her to stop. She could not shout for him to stop, and Xiao Xiao being on top of her was really very torturous. Jiang Ruan clenched her teeth and said, "You, hurry up." Xiao Xiao was slightly startled. At this moment, the lamp had not been extinguished, and Xiao Xiao's face was really a face that could bring calamity to a country. Moreover, his pair of deep eyes seemed to be sparkling like the stars. He said in a low voice, "R1." Jiang Ruan ruthlessly pinched his slender waist, and looked at him with some resentment. I can. I'm ready. Hurry up." Xiao Xiao smiled slightly, and said in a faint voice, "R1, it's too late for you to regret now." It was as if a red plum flower had bloomed soundlessly in winter, gorgeous and dazzling. In the entire world, there was only this plum flower's beauty that could captivate one's soul and steal one's soul. The petals trembled slightly and were delicate and timid, and because of this, they bloomed with a different kind of beauty in the cold and hard winter. The snowflakes were cold and sparkling, and the red plum flower was charming and warm. This was a beautiful scene made in heaven, and anyone who saw it would be lost in thought. However, they bloomed quietly in the night, and no one knew of the beauty that was presented to the world in such an intimate manner. In the dark night, the charming and gentle sounds seemed to travel very far. Even though it was a bitterly cold winter day, the room seemed to be lit with a fiery passion. Life was a short period of time, and they had probably completed their most intimate communication on this night. It was as if the displeasure of the estrangement had vanished into thin air, and the two of them had become one in the most frank and sincere manner. The darkness and sorrow of the previous life, the endless pain hidden in the bottom of their hearts, and the secrets that could not be spoken of by others, seemed to have completely changed after this night. In this world, there was one person who would henceforth stand shoulder to shoulder with you, sharing weal and woe in the name of husband and wife. This was a strange time in the capital, but it made one look forward to it. Xiao Xiao turned over from Jiang Ruan's body. After such an intense spring night, his whole body was covered in sweat. Jiang Ruan lay on the bed. Whenever she thought of the scene of her passionately taking the initiative just now, she wanted to directly fall asleep on the pillow. She thought about how she had taken the initiative for the first time. In the future, when Xiao Xiao thought about it, he would probably find it funny. Xiao Xiao caressed her long hair and said gently, "I will call someone to fetch some water." "No need." Jiang Yuan called out in a moment of desperation, but when she met Xiao Xiao's gaze, she felt a little awkward. However, asking for water at this moment was undoubtedly equivalent to announcing to the entire Wang Fu what they had done today. She was still not used to openly presenting herself in front of others, especially for such a private matter. However, looking at her sticky body, it would be inexcusable if she did not fetch water. Immediately, she was somewhat at a loss. Xiao Xiao looked at her thoughtfully and nodded, "I will go fetch it." "You? Is your body still in pain?" With one glance, he saw through Jiang Ruan's apprehension, and his words were also extremely considerate. However, as soon as he mentioned that her body was in pain, Jiang Ruan immediately recalled those intense scenes just now. "It doesn't hurt anymore." Jiang Ruan quickly replied. Just as she finished speaking, she felt a wave of soreness coming from the lower part of her body. She could not help but secretly grumble in her heart. They all looked at Xiao Xiao's usually cold and cheerless appearance, but on the bed, it was as if he had changed into another person. As expected of someone who practiced martial arts, his physical strength was surprisingly good. Even though she had always been able to endure, she still felt that she was somewhat unable to withstand it. Unfortunately, this fellow still had a bad heart and insisted that she cry out. In this lifetime, she had never felt so humiliated. Xiao Xiao was really black in his stomach. How could she not have noticed it normally? Xiao Xiao could not help but pull the corners of his mouth and slowly said, "All right, I will go and brew the medicine." He had said the two words, brew medicine, with a profound meaning, as if it contained an extremely meaningful meaning. Moreover, his expression was indifferent. Jiang Yuan choked for a moment and thought of that bowl of medicine just now. Even if it became soup medicine, it would still be soup medicine. Originally, she had wanted to use the effects of the soup medicine to achieve what she had done today. Who knew that after the effects of the medicine had subsided, she would actually lose control like this? Now that she thought about it, it really made her blush with shame. The embroidered uniform guards in this Wang Fu had always had excellent hearing. Perhaps they had even heard the movements in their room. When she thought of this, Jiang Ruan's expression became somewhat ashamed and indignant.
Chapter 201. Sure enough, Xiao Xiao quickly fetched some water and seemed to have said a few words outside. Jiang Yuan was somewhat embarrassed to think that it was only Lian Xiao and the others who were part of the genie guards. Xiao Xiao walked to the edge of the bed and was about to bend down to carry her. Jiang Yuan was startled and asked, "What are you doing? If you don't let the servant girls serve you, I will carry you over to freshen up." Xiao Xiao replied good-naturedly, "No need." Jiang Yuan lifted the quilt and was about to jump down. "I can wash myself." If she were to wash with Xiao Xiao like this, even if she pretended to be calm, she would not be able to remain calm. Who knew that as soon as she moved, she would feel sore and weak all over, and immediately stopped. Xiao Xiao looked at her calmly and suddenly smiled, "I won't do anything." Jiang Yuan thought that at this moment, it would indeed be difficult for her to wash herself, and if she continued to refuse, it would seem pretentious. So she nodded and Xiao Xiao bent down to carry her to the wooden tub behind the screen. The two of them had tossed and turned, and Jiang Yuan was already very tired. Xiao Xiao, on the other hand, looked very refreshed and carried her effortlessly. When she sat in the wooden tub, the gentle water was very comfortable. As soon as Jiang Yuan relaxed, she felt her eyelids become heavy and she did not know when she had fallen asleep. By the time Xiao Xiao carefully helped her dry her body, Jiang Yuan had already fallen into a deep sleep. Xiao Xiao smiled and carried her back to the bed, tucking her in. He was afraid that Jiang Yuan would be tired, so he had to be considerate for the first time. At this moment, seeing her sleeping so soundly, his heart ached and he leaned over to kiss her forehead lightly. Lian Xiao came in with a bowl of medicine. Xiao Xiao silently shook his head at her. Lian Xiao was well aware of this and secretly laughed as she retreated. That night, how many people in the Jining Wang Fu knew about this charming and gentle affair? Presumably, only the secret guards lying on the eaves of the walls would know. However, the final winner of the bet that Jin Si had made was the banker himself. Jin Si generously took out the gambling money and invited everyone to eat and drink. When they were tipsy, the secret guards all cried tears of joy. It was as if they could see the next young master of the Jining Wangfu rushing over to the Wangfu. By the time Jiang Wan woke up, it was already the morning of the second day. After a night's sleep, her body felt as if it had been run over by something, and it was even worse than the previous night. The quilt beside her was neat and tidy. Xiao Xiao was not on the bed. She propped herself up and sat up. The door creaked open and Xiao Xiao walked in with a bowl of medicine. When he saw that Jiang Wan had woken up, he placed the bowl of medicine on the small table that had collapsed.
Reaching out, he touched her forehead and asked, "Does your body still hurt?" Jiang Wan. Xiao Xiao couldn't help but laugh again. These days, he often laughed. His appearance was good to begin with, and when he laughed like this, he looked like a peach blossom. He was probably in a very good mood after eating. Jiang Wan compared herself to herself. Reaching out, she picked up the bowl of medicine from the side and blew on it. After a few mouthfuls, she downed the medicine. That medicine was probably a prescription that Xiao Xiao had ordered someone to prescribe. It was quite effective. After drinking it, she felt her body warm up, and even the soreness had lessened a lot. After she finished drinking, Xiao Xiao took the empty bowl from Jiang Ruan's hands and said, "You can rest in the room today." "That won't do." Jiang Ruan shook her head. "Today, the case department is trying a case. I have to make a trip there." After thinking for a while, she said, "My body has almost recovered after drinking the medicine. It's not a big deal to go and listen to the case. You don't have to worry." Xiao Xiao knew that Jiang Ruan always had her own ideas. Her attitude of admitting her mistakes was good, but next time, she would still disregard her own body. His heart ached, but he was also helpless, so he said, "I will let Jean San and the others follow you. The people from the case department will not make things difficult for you." The meaning of his words was hinting at the people from the Department of Case Management. Jiang Wan looked at him and said, "If I sue my own biological father, there will inevitably be people in the capital who will talk about it. It will even affect your reputation and place Jining Wang Fu in an awkward position. Do you think that what I did was wrong? He is not your father." Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "You no longer have any connection with the Jiang family." Jiang Wan was slightly stunned, only to hear Xiao Xiao continue, "You married into Jining Wang Fu, so you are a member of the Xiao family. Whether it is for revenge or to overturn the case, the Xiao family will always be your backer." His expression was firm and his words were gentle. He was obviously the coldest person, but his heart was always so warm that it made people feel happy. Jiang Wan smiled, "Xiao Xiao, thank you." It was not a perfunctory thank you, nor was it a thank you from an ally to an ally. This thank you was full of sincerity and came from the bottom of his heart. In this world, it was rare to find someone who would always stand behind you without asking for a reason. No matter what you did, that person would always insist on being by your side. This was affection and righteousness. No need. Xiao Xiao smiled, "If you really want to thank me, just be more enthusiastic at night." Jiang Ruan, in a corner of the palace, Xian Pei was listening to the news that Ming Yu had reported. He sneered, "Jiang Quan's good days have probably come to an end. He dared to make a move against her a few years ago, and now it is time for him to bear the consequences. The death of Xia Yan and Jiang Su Su is not the end of everything. Does he think that there is still a glimmer of hope? Ridiculous." Ming Yu stood silently at the side. She knew that this little master of hers had a special relationship with Jiang Ruan. It seemed that the two of them had a special relationship. However, something that even Xiao Xiao could not find out. Naturally, she, a secret guard, would not be able to find out. Although she was puzzled, she knew that Xian Pei had always protected Jiang Yuan. Now, Jiang Quan's deeds had spread throughout the capital. As a father, he had been so unkind to his own daughter. Even the common people would scold him for having the heart of a wolf and the lungs of a dog, let alone Xian Pei, who had a close relationship with Jiang Yuan. Have the people I asked you to go to the Bureau of Investigation been settled? Xian Pei played with the luminous pearl that was the size of a pigeon's egg in his hand. That was a gift that the emperor had bestowed upon him yesterday after seeing that he had answered his homework extremely well. This luminous pearl was not uncommon in the palace. Even if it was placed in Xian Hua's place, he would be envious. But now, it was being played with by Xian Pei without a care in the world. This was enough to show Xian Pei's current position in the court. That good-for-nothing prince who was not favored and could be bullied by everyone had already disappeared. No one dared to underestimate him anymore. Your Highness, Mingyu asked, puzzled. Xiao Wangye's side must have already informed the Bureau of Investigation. Even if your Highness does not take action, the people of the Bureau of Investigation will not allow Jiang Yuan to gain any benefits. Why does your Highness need to do this? Xian Pei's every move was being monitored by people with ulterior motives. If someone found out that he had interfered in Jiang Yuan's matter, who knew what kind of rumors would spread? In the palace, the best thing to do was to play it safe. Especially since Jiang Quan's case this time could be perfectly resolved without him taking action. Xiao Xiao is doing what he should be doing, and what this prince is doing is also this prince's matter. Whatever this prince wants to do, does this prince still need to bask in his glory? Xian Pei snorted coldly. The people of the Bureau of Investigation have always been crafty. With Jinying Wang pressuring him, coupled with this prince's move, they will realize that this matter is no small matter. Naturally, they will not leave any leeway to attack Jiang Quan. In any case, as long as Jiang Quan can be punished a little more, this prince will be very happy. Mingyu shrugged her shoulders helplessly. Xian Pei's enmity towards Xiao Xiao had never diminished, but as an adult, Mingyu felt that it was somewhat childish. This rarely appeared on Xian Pei, who had always been mature. Moreover, she always felt that there was a hint of jealousy towards Xiao Xiao. Naturally, he was jealous of Jiang Yuan. However, Xian Pei was still very young, so Mingyu could only think that she was being overly sensitive. The entrance to the main hall of the Bureau of Investigation had long been surrounded by commoners who wanted to watch the bustle. The Bureau of Investigation had always been famous for conducting fair trials. Every time they tried a case, it was a private matter between the aristocrats of the capital. Naturally, people would come to watch the bustle and listen to the secrets. Therefore, unless one was really forced into a dead end, the average person would not bring the case to the Bureau of Investigation. After all, one's dirty linen should not be aired in public. No one wanted to bring out their own family's private and shameful matters to become a topic of discussion in broad daylight. When Jiang Yuan arrived, it naturally caused an uproar. Since ancient times, it was the first time in history that a case against one's biological father had occurred. Moreover, the one who had done this was Jiang Yuan. Initially, she had been a nobody in the Jiangfu, but later on, she had become a popular Junju in front of Empress Dowager Ida. Now, she was even the princess consort of a traitor and a rebel that everyone kept a secret. Every one of Jiang Yuan's identities caused people to sigh. Admittedly, there were many gazes of jealousy, but there were even more gazes of envy. What Jiang Quan had done was naturally unpardonable, but Jiang Yuan's actions had also not recognized even her own kin. The people's attitudes were clearly divided into two groups. One group of people firmly believed that Jiang Quan deserved to die 10,000 times for his crimes. Although Jiang Yuan's actions were out of line, they were still excusable. The other group of people felt that Jiang Yuan had violated the human relations that had existed since the founding of the Great Jin dynasty, and that it was really unfilial of her to bring her own biological father to court. Regardless of how others viewed her, Jiang Yuan had never cared. She alighted from the carriage. Today, she was dressed in an embroidered robe. The patterns were complex and solemn, setting off her entire person to appear extremely noble. On the outside, she wore a satin fox fur pleated cloak, the color of which was as warm as a burning fire. It had snowed the whole night before, and the accumulated snow this morning was half a foot high. Wrapped in white and white, only her red robes fluttered in the wind, beautiful and cold as she stood where she was. That gorgeous beauty almost caused people to involuntarily hold their breath. Even though the personnel of the case department had always treated everyone who came to court equally, when they faced Jiang Yuan, they could not help but show some respect. This daughter of the Jiang family could not be underestimated. Last night, their head, the department judge Sun Su, had specially instructed their subordinates to be more polite to Jiang Yuan. Even someone like Sun Su, who was not afraid of power and status, could be treated with such importance. Presumably, the background of this daughter of the Jiang family could not be underestimated. In comparison, the treatment that Jiang Quan received was 108,000 miles away. In court, Sun Su's temperament was eccentric. Almost no one feared him. Even when facing his former colleagues, he would not give them any face because of this. What Jiang Quan cared about the most was his face. Now, without rhyme or reason, he had lowered his head in front of Sun Su, as if he really was a criminal being tried by Sun Su. He was already burning with anger. Jiang Xing was in the military camp discussing military affairs with the former general, so he was really unable to rush over. Jiang Yuan entered the main hall and found that Zhao Guang and the three Zhao brothers were also there. When Zhao Yuanfeng saw her, he greeted her warmly, R1. After all, Zhao Mei was a member of the Zhao family. Although many years ago, it was said that she had severed all ties with the Zhao family and that the Zhao family had never raised this unfilial daughter, in reality, blood ties could not be severed. Especially the pearl in the palm of the Zhao family. When the Zhao family found out that Jiang Yuan had sued the Jiang family to the case department, they flew into a rage. If it were not for Jiang Xing's help in persuading them, Zhao Guang would have already rushed into the minister's fu and beheaded Jiang Quan to accompany Zhao Mei in death. The Zhao family had always been protective of their own. Today, they had come to the case department to express the Zhao family's attitude. Zhao Mei was the daughter of the Zhao family. If Zhao Mei's death was not a coincidence, and was even related to Jiang Quan, then the Zhao family would definitely not let the matter rest. Jiang Yuan stepped forward to greet the Zhao family one by one. The womenfolk of the Zhao family and a few of their grandchildren had not come. Li Shi had already regretted the matter with Zhao Mei. If she were to find out the truth in court, it would be inevitable that she would be agitated. Jiang Yuan greeted the Zhao family, but only Jiang Quan was left out. Jiang Quan, who was standing at the side, only felt that the surrounding gazes were on him. He felt very ashamed and indignant and angrily scolded, "Unfilial descendant." Zhao Guang glared and wanted to scold back, but unexpectedly, Jiang Yuan was one step ahead of him. She asked Jiang Quan, "I wonder who Minister Jiang is talking about?" Jiang Quan did not expect that the moment she opened her mouth, she would be so merciless. Immediately, he said angrily, "Facing your own father with such an attitude, I don't know where your etiquette and honor went. I'm afraid that Minister Jiang has remembered wrongly." Jiang Yuan smiled. "Yesterday, half of the blood has already been paid off. Bengong no longer has any connection with the minister's fu, so where did this father come from?" Jiang Quan was at a loss for words. Everyone recalled how Jiang Yuan had resolutely used a dagger to cut open the back of her hand in the snow yesterday. Jiang Quan's old face flushed red. His face, which had always been refined and elegant, actually showed some signs of contortion. "Silence!" The advisor, who had opened the court, announced in a long voice. The imperial bodyguards on both sides stood silently. Dressed in the uniform of an official's magistrate, Sun Su strode in with large strides. He sat down on the highest seat in the center. His gaze swept downwards, and he passed the complaint to the advisor beside him. The advisor took the complaint, cleared his throat, and read the contents of the complaint in a loud voice. The contents of the complaint described how Xia Yan and the Xia family had conspired to murder Zhao Mei and her 2 sons, including the ambush on Jiang Xing in the forest, as well as the sinister method she had used when she was young. It caused everyone's heart to palpitate with fear and trepidation. The indifferent attitude of Jiang Quan in the complaint also caused everyone to be flabbergasted. This kind of internal strife and intrigue was not uncommon in large and influential families. What was rare was that Jiang Wan and Jiang Xing were the children of the minister's Fu. Jiang Quan was actually so indifferent to them, allowing them to do as they pleased. The advisor was also a character. This complaint was written to make people feel indignant, but he had also written it in a cadence that was full of rich emotions. It caused the men in the crowd to roll up their sleeves and wish that they could rush in and immediately beat Jiang Quan up, while the women used their handkerchiefs to vigorously wipe away their tears. Although Zhao Guang and the 3 brothers of the Zhao family had long known that Zhao Mei's life in the minister's Fu was not good, now that the complaint was read out line by line, it caused them to feel anxious. In this world, no one understood better than Jiang Wan how painful and dangerous it was for Zhao Mei and her 2 brothers to live in the Jiang Fu. Therefore, she was very serious in her writing. The more the Zhao family listened, the angrier they became. They were so angry that their eyes were about to split open, and they wished that they could immediately rush over and kill Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan frowned. Now, everyone's gazes were directed at him without a trace of kindness, and he had unexpectedly become the target of public criticism. He did not know when Jiang Wan had actually gained such influence. Sun Tzu's temperament, as they had been colleagues for many years, was very clear. When facing Jiang Wan, his subordinates were respectful and humble. Did Jiang Wan actually have such ability? Unbeknownst to them, the confidence he had previously had been replaced by uneasiness. Jiang Quan's expression was no longer as confident as before. The first part of the complaint was, after all, an attempt to commit a crime. However, when it reached the last part, the topic changed to the matter of Zhao Mei's poisoning. It was clearly written in the complaint that the poison had been administered by Xia Yan, and that Jiang Quan was an accomplice. This was because he had known about it, yet he had looked on with folded arms, and had even encouraged and egged her on in secret. When the complaint was finished, Jiang Quan could no longer restrain his anger and stood up, saying, "Nonsense. A load of nonsense. What poison? I did not order anyone to poison her. Zhao Mei died of illness, how can you falsely accuse me?" At the same time that he resented Jiang Wan, he also resented Zhao Mei, who had passed away so early. He only felt that everything had started with Zhao Mei. Zhao Guang suddenly stood up from his seat and angrily said, "Jiang Quan, do you think that I do not dare to take your life here?" His bones of steel had been tempered from the battlefield. Normally, a glare from him could frighten a child to tears. At this moment, he was truly enraged. That bloodthirsty aura hit Jiang Quan in the face. Jiang Quan shivered and suddenly swallowed the words he had been about to say. A trace of disdain flashed in Zhao Yuanping's eyes as he chuckled and said, "Minister Jiang, why are you so anxious? You have not been convicted yet. Perhaps there is still a chance to turn the situation around. If you really want to cry injustice, there is no harm in waiting until the last moment." These words contained a faintly discernible chill that made one's heart tremble involuntarily. Jiang Quan was just about to speak when he heard Jiang Ruan's smiling voice say, "Not only that, I have evidence. Minister Jiang, let's first have official Sun look at the evidence before we speak." Jiang Quan was startled. He had not expected that Jiang Ruan would have evidence. After all, so many years had passed. He had thought that even if Jiang Ruan dug up old events, she would not be able to stir up any big waves. An old case without any evidence, what could be the final outcome? However, when Jiang Ruan said that she had evidence, he could not help but feel a little guilty. However, his mouth still stubbornly said, "What nonsense are you fabricating?" Sun Tzu slammed the gavel and shouted, "Bring in the witness." The subordinate very quickly brought in the so-called witness. It was a skinny young woman. Upon closer inspection, her appearance could be considered delicate and pretty, but for some unknown reason, she looked somewhat haggard. Perhaps it was due to the pressures of life, but her appearance actually made her appear older than her actual age. When Jiang Quan saw this, he sneered and said mockingly, "I do not know this person. Even if you are a witness, you should still invite someone from the minister's fu." When the woman heard this, she raised her head and said in a somewhat hoarse voice, "It has been a long time since we parted." Laoi does not recognize this servant, but this servant still recognizes Laoi. Jiang Quan was startled and carefully looked at the woman. After looking at her for a long time, he finally said in shock, "You are Butterfly?" Butterfly smiled faintly. It is difficult for Laoi to still remember this servant. "Why are you here?" The hand that Jiang Quan pointed at her with could not stop trembling. At that time, he had also heard of Jiang Su's expulsion of Butterfly. As a servant, she had not done a good job seriously and had mixed up the placenta bought from the pharmacy with the male fetus that had miscarried in the fu. This had ruined Jiang Su's reputation and caused Jiang Su to be frightened. For such a servant, even if you beat her to death, it would not be too much. However, at that time, Jiang Su had already sold her off. Jiang Quan had thought that such a servant had died long ago, so he did not know why she had appeared here. Butterfly smiled, but that smile was somewhat strange. When she looked at Jiang Quan, a trace of hatred quickly flashed through her eyes. "The reason why this servant has come here is naturally because I cannot bear the condemnation of my conscience. I have personally come to testify for the innocent former Furin, eldest young master, and eldest young Mississippi nonsense." Hearing this, Jiang Quan was so angry that his face turned green. "What exactly are you talking about?" He turned his head to look at Jiang Yuan, who was smiling faintly, and suddenly realized, "What benefits did she give you that you actually want to slander me like this?" "Butterfly, do you know how serious the crime of slandering an official of the imperial court is?" Jiang Quan seemed to have lost all reason, but the people in the court were calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos, including the sector judge Sun Tzu. The more Jiang Quan jumped over the wall in panic, the more it revealed his ugly appearance. Sun Tzu had already been bribed beforehand, and seeing that Jiang Yuan and the Zhao family were watching happily, he naturally would not obstruct them. Faced with Jiang Quan's somewhat crazed questioning, Butterfly shook her head and said, "Eldest young miss did not give me any benefits. Master, you are well aware of what you have done, so why do you need to put on such an innocent act? You must know that everything is predestined, and the heavens are watching. When you were doing things, you should have thought of the day when the matter would come to light. Why did you harm me like this?" Jiang Quan said angrily. Butterfly lowered her head and pretended to turn a deaf ear to him. Jiang Yuan, who was sitting to one side, smiled faintly. Of course, Butterfly would come out to testify for her, not only because of her promise, but also because Butterfly deeply hated the Jiang family. When Jiang Su sold Butterfly because of the Xi placenta incident, it could be said that it was also Jiang Su's own fault. In any case, she was still a servant girl who had been by her side since she was young, yet she had been directly sold to a 9th-grade brothel. What kind of place was that brothel? Entering it was tantamount to entering a fire pit. Naturally, one could imagine what kind of life Butterfly had led. In fact, when Jiang Su had sold Butterfly, Jiang Yuan had sent Lu Zhu to bribe the brothel's procuress, and had been secretly monitoring Butterfly's every move. She would not let her die, but she would not let her feel better either. Butterfly had been by Jiang Su's side for so many years, and knew a little about the things that Xia Yan and Jiang Su had done. Jiang Yuan was well aware that this was an excellent chess piece that would one day be put to good use. For example, at this moment, the appearance of this chess piece had already caused Jiang Quan to lose more than half of the game. She had appeared in front of Butterfly, promising that as long as Butterfly was willing to testify, she would save her from this crisis. Perhaps when Butterfly had first been sold, she would not have agreed to this condition, because Xia Yan was an astute person, and the servant girls she had chosen for Jiang Su were all extremely loyal. But after such a long time, Butterfly, who had been tortured to the point of death, could not even save her own life, so why would she care about loyalty? After so many years, she only had a deep hatred for the Jiang Fu. If it were not for Xia Yan and her daughter, if it were not for Jiang Quan, how could she have been sold to such a lowly place? Time was a wonderful thing. Hatred could turn into love, and love could also turn into hatred. Therefore, when Jiang Yuan stated the condition, Butterfly agreed without hesitation. Chapter 202. Minister Jiang, Sun Tzu said with a straight face, "The court is not a place for you to act as you please. Let's first listen to everyone's words. I wish all the examinees a successful examination." Before Jiang Quan could speak, Butterfly kowtowed to Sun Tzu and said, replying to Milord, "This servant is here to confess the crime committed by Furen." She lowered her head, but her voice was clear, just enough to reach the ears of the commoners watching the bustle outside. When the late Furen was still alive, my family's Furen was only a concubine. Although Master doted on Yinyang and Miss, Furen held the position of mistress. Yinyang has always been proud and arrogant, and was born of a high-ranking noble family. Naturally, she was not willing to submit to others. Although she ate well in the minister's fu, and sometimes even had a higher status than the late Furen, Yinyang was still dissatisfied. Although Butterfly's words seemed to be merely stating the facts, when it reached the ears of others, it felt very different. Who did not know how Xia Cheng's title of nobility had come about? If not for his brother's early death, it would not have been his turn as a bastard son. Even the title of nobility was obtained after Xia Yan entered the minister's fu. Before that, she was only the daughter of a minor official's bastard son. How could she be considered a noble family? She preferred to have the face to say so. If she was really a daughter of a high-ranking noble family, why would Jiang Quan marry Zhao Mei and not Xia Yan? A daughter of a bastard son was so vain, and according to Butterfly, Xia Yan's status in the minister's fu was even higher than Zhao Mei's. If this was not favoring a concubine to the detriment of a wife, then what was? Although everyone had heard rumors that Jiang Quan only favored Xia Yan, they all thought that it was after Zhao Mei's death. It turned out that not long after Zhao Mei had married into the minister's fu, Jiang Quan had gone too far. It was because he had taken a fancy to the power in the other's house, and once he realized that it would not bring any benefits to his career, he revealed his true colors. Butterfly continued, later, Yinyang thought that as an official of the court, if Master could not find a reason to divorce his wife, he would have to live under others for the rest of his life. Unwilling to accept this, she tried to poison the late Furen. On that day, Yinyang spent a large sum of money to buy poison from a foreign land and mixed it into the late Furen's daily meals. My late wife was poisoned bit by bit, and as the poison accumulated, she died. And all of this, Master also knows. There was one time when Master discovered Ant's poison. Master even told Ant to be careful and not to leave behind any evidence. After saying that, Butterfly kowtowed to Sun Tzu twice and said, "Your Excellency, everything I said is true. I dare not lie to you." Nonsense. Nonsense. Pointing at Butterfly, Jiang Quan angrily scolded, "Who gave you the courage to spout nonsense and disturb the hearts of people here? Butterfly, don't forget who you are. You are a servant of my Jiang Fu." Butterfly shook her head. Master must have forgotten that Butterfly's indenture no longer exists. Butterfly is no longer a member of the minister's residence. As she said this, although she tried to suppress something, her eyes revealed a trace of hatred. Jiang Quan was at a loss for words. Sun Tzu slammed the gavel again. Silence. Butterfly knelt on the ground and said something shocking, "Your Excellency, this commoner still has evidence to say." Jiang Quan was startled. Sun Tzu said in a low voice, "Where is the evidence?" Butterfly glanced at Jiang Yuan, who was sitting peacefully on a seat at the side. The smile on her lips seemed to have not wavered since the beginning. Butterfly's heart was at ease, and her tone was magnanimous as she said, It is in Madame's room. At that time, because that medicine was really precious, and Madame did not know when the late Madame's illness would be incurable, she thought that this medicine might still be useful in the future, so she ordered this commoner to keep it. On that day, this commoner buried the medicine under a tree in Madame's courtyard. However, the prescription was probably still there. Later, Master said that it would be useful, so he kept it in a box in his study. Coincidentally, I don't know why, but Master probably forgot about that box. One time, Madame asked this servant to tidy up the study, and this servant put that box in the innermost wooden box. That wooden box would not be touched for many years, because it was filled with old things. Zhao Guang cupped his hands towards Sun Tzu, and his tone was unquestionable. Sun Darren, since the evidence has been laid out, shouldn't we send people to search the room? Naturally. Sun Tzu's expression was solemn. This official has already ordered soldiers to search the minister's fu. Jiang Quan sneered. What a joke. Do you think that by spouting nonsense, you can convict me of a crime? Butterfly, I see that you are not afraid of death. He felt that he had a well-thought-out plan, and that the soldiers would definitely not be able to find anything in the room. Not to mention that he had not directly interfered when Xia Yan had poisoned Jiang Yuan. Even Xia Yan herself would not be so stupid as to leave behind evidence. Xia Yan was meticulous and thorough in her work, and she would clean up any traces that could be used against her. Although he did not know what benefits Butterfly had received from Jiang Yuan to create such false evidence, Jiang Quan also acknowledged that the minister's fu was not a place that just anyone could enter. Especially the study, which was of utmost importance, he had to check it several times a day. What wooden box, what box, he had never heard of. Butterfly probably only cared about lying, but she could not produce any concrete evidence. If she could not produce it, then she could not be convicted. What could Butterfly do? As he thought this, he looked at Jiang Ruan's expression. However, he saw that Jiang Ruan was sitting upright, and as if she had sensed his gaze, she turned her head and smiled at him. Jiang Ruan's smile was even more unperturbed than Jiang Quan's, and seemed to conceal some subtle ridicule. That gaze immediately made Jiang Quan sober up, and he could not help but feel some lingering fear. It was not that Jiang Quan did not know how strange this daughter of his was. For so many years, whether it was the Xia family or herself, they had not been able to gain any advantage from her hands. Even if the Jiang Fu was impregnable, it could not guarantee that she would come up with some strange method to harm others. At this moment, the officers and soldiers in charge of the search had already returned. The leader of the officers and soldiers reported to Sun Tzu before striding into the hall in large strides. He bent down and whispered a few words to Sun Tzu. As Sun Tzu listened, he glanced at Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan's heart thumped. Without waiting for him to think of a clue, Sun Tzu slammed the gavel and shouted, "Audacious Jiang Quan! As an official of the imperial court, you do not govern your household strictly, allowing your concubine to harm others, and even conspire with her to murder your wife. What crime do you deserve? The soldiers have already found evidence from the wooden chest and the box in your room. What else do you have to say?" As he finished speaking, the official next to him presented an iron box. Everyone could clearly see that a shallow piece of paper floated out from the box that Sun Tzu had personally opened. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, it naturally could not be faked. Zhao Yuanping got up and walked to Sun Tzu's side. He took the paper and read it in his hands. After he had finished reading 10 lines at a glance, Zhao Yuanping returned the paper to Sun Tzu. When he looked at Jiang Quan again, his smile was completely cold and detached. Minister Jiang is indeed very scheming. If I had not seen it with my own eyes, this young master would not have known that there could be such a cruel and unscrupulous person in this world. Zhao Yuanping had always been used to quietly making sarcastic remarks. When Jiang Quan heard these words, he was so angry that his face turned ashen. However, what followed was disbelief. Even when he had come out to receive the case today, he had carefully inspected the study before leaving. He had not seen any wooden chest or box, so how could it suddenly appear? What exactly was going on? He cried out in grievance. This is absolutely not my doing. Sun Tzu, as the head of the case department, you must pay attention to getting to the bottom of the matter. Just based on a small prescription, how could you dare to bring me to justice? This is clearly someone deliberately framing me. Don't tell me you don't know. This official has always only looked at evidence. Sun Tzu said unhurriedly. It was not that he did not hear the threat in Jiang Quan's words, but what kind of case was this? It was Xiao Xiao's wife, the current Jinying Wangfei, the former Hong and Junzhu, who had personally complained. Everyone in the officialdom of the Great Jin Court knew what kind of power the Jinying Wangfu behind her was. Xiao Xiao had personally greeted them, so how could he dare to slight them? Moreover, the victim of this case was the beloved daughter of the general's household. If they did not give an explanation, based on Zhao Guang's protective nature, they would most likely tear down the case department. Moreover, that person from the palace had already greeted them. Although the case department handled cases that ordinary people did not dare to handle, even if it involved many officials in the capital, Sun Tzu was not afraid. That was because Sun Tzu himself relied on the emperor to pursue an official career and did not need to rely on anyone's face. But if it was the emperor's trusted aide, there would be no fish if the water was too clear. Sun Tzu was well aware of this principle. After so many years of sitting in such an official position that offended people, Sun Tzu himself was extremely good at conducting himself. Now, Xian Pei's status in the palace was steadily rising, and the emperor was very fond of him. The fifth prince and the eighth prince were fighting openly and secretly, but no one could say for sure who the throne would fall to. Perhaps the future crown prince of the Great Jin Court would be this 13th prince who had just made a name for himself. Xian Pei had specially sent someone over to greet him. Although he did not know the reason, Sun Tzu also felt no small amount of pressure. It was precisely because they had been colleagues for so many years that Sun Tzu could clearly see that this time, it would be very difficult for Jiang Quan to be kind, because every person he had offended had the ability to put him to death. Zhao Yuanfeng said leisurely, Minister Jiang, the minister's fu is your official residence. Naturally, only your people can enter. You don't even know when that box was placed in there. You can't possibly ask us outsiders for any answers. You should know that since the establishment of your minister's fu, apart from my family's youngest sister, no one from the Zhao family has ever set foot in it. Zhao Yuanfeng's words were not without irony. At first, Zhao Mei had cut off all relations with the Zhao family, and after Zhao Mei's death, the Jiang family had also forbidden all relations with the general's fu. They even secretly regarded the general's fu as a formidable enemy. The Zhao and Jiang families had never dealt with each other, so there was no way for the Zhao family to enter the Jiang fu. Jiang Quan had hit a snag, but he was not in the mood to argue with Zhao Yuanfeng. Now, he also realized the importance of the matter. With both witnesses and material evidence present, coupled with Sun Tzu's attitude, it would be very difficult to escape punishment. At this point, Jiang Quan, who had always been full of confidence, was already somewhat flustered. He desperately tried to think of how the box could have appeared in the study. His gaze swept through the crowd without any focus, and suddenly, he froze. A familiar figure was mixed in the crowd. It was a young and beautiful woman. Jiang Ruan stared blankly, and a few thoughts flashed through her mind. She immediately roared, "Xia Yu! You slut, you dare to harm me!" The figure of the woman in the crowd was the current mistress of the minister's fu, Xia Yu. Originally, she had lowered her head to avoid Jiang Quan's gaze, but now, upon hearing Jiang Quan shout so loudly, she could not help but become somewhat angry. For a moment, her face flushed red, and she did not speak. However, Jiang Quan seemed to have understood in a split second. Disregarding the occasion, he loudly cursed, "It's her. It's this slut who colluded with outsiders to harm me. Usually, only she can enter my study. Only she can unwittingly, and in the shortest time possible, stuff things in there without anyone noticing. Xia Yu, I have treated you well, yet you are so vicious as to murder your own husband. You vicious woman. Xia Yu was in the crowd, and everyone's gazes were directed at her. She endured it, and suddenly, 2 streams of hot tears flowed down her cheeks. Master, ever since Yunyang married you and became your wife, where have I not done well? How could you treat me like this, and even pin such a heinous crime on Yunyang? How could Yunyang frame Master? If anything bad happened to Master, how could a lonely and helpless woman like Yunyang survive? Yunyang knows that Master and Yan Jiejia's love is as deep as the ocean, and ever since Yunyang married into the family, Master has never liked Yunyang. But Master, Yunyang is also your wife. How could you treat Yunyang like this? She was born somewhat thin, weak, and timid, and after saying these words, her heart was full of sorrow. She knelt down and kowtowed a few times towards the main door of the public hall. Forget it, Master. Since you and I are husband and wife, if Yunyang can save Master, Yunyang will be willing to save Master's life. That box and wooden chest were definitely Yunyang's. As she said these words, her tears fell like rain, and she almost fainted from crying. People had always sympathized with the weak, and if the weak was a woman with a good appearance, their sympathy would be doubled. The more Xia Yu spoke in such a manner, the more the crowd suspected that Jiang Quan had even framed his newly married wife. He was really a selfish man. Every word that Xia Yu said was reasonable. Indeed, now that the Xia family was no more, why would she frame Jiang Quan? The Jiang Fu had fallen, and she had become a widow. How difficult would it be for her to continue living? As for what Xia Yu had said about Jiang Quan still thinking about Xia Yan's matter, everyone laughed in their hearts. Perhaps in this world, only a man like Jiang Quan would never forget a woman who had been unfaithful and unclean, who had made him wear a green hat. Sure enough, the pot had its own lid. Jiang Yuan smiled as she watched Xia Yu's performance in the crowd. She only felt that it was interesting. The women of the Xia family seemed to have an innate talent for being entertainers, especially when it came to drawing people's tears and sympathy. In the past, Jiang Quan had fallen for this trick of Xia Yan the most. Now that Xia Yan had been replaced by Xia Yu, who knew if Jiang Quan would still be able to endure it? A woman's lies and tears, only after truly experiencing them, would one know how formidable they were. Now, Jiang Quan probably hated the Xia family to the core. Xia Yu was an intelligent person. Since the Xia family had fallen, she, as a chess piece to maintain the relationship between the Xia and Jiang families, was useless. Xia Yu herself also knew that with Jiang Quan's ambition, there would come a day when he would kick her, a useless stumbling block, aside. Moreover, she was now the mistress of the Jiang family. She was well aware of what the Jiang family was like. A mansion with an empty shell would collapse sooner or later. Jiang Quan was neither cold nor warm towards her, and Xia Yu was still in the prime of her youth. How could she be willing? The women of the Xia family had always been brimming with ambition. Even if Xia Yu was a distant cousin, she would not be willing to be buried for the rest of her life. Jiang Ruan made a deal with her. For the sake of her own future, Xia Yu did not hesitate to betray Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan was so angry that he was about to go mad. The gazes of the people around him were filled with suspicion. He wanted to find someone who could speak up for him, but in the end, he discovered that the people who could speak up for him were all gone. His wife, his children, his colleagues, and even his allies, not a single one of them was by his side. He suddenly discovered that he had become the one who had been abandoned. He had become a useless chess piece. This is what you want? Jiang Quan stared at Jiang Ruan solemnly. Suddenly, he laughed bitterly. You made everyone betray me. I raised such a good daughter, ha ha ha, I actually did not know that I had raised such a good daughter. Too much unrighteousness will bring about one's own destruction. Jiang Ruan replied indifferently. Minister Jiang, the gods are watching from above. That day, when you did all this to my mother, you should have thought of this ending. Yes, she wanted Jiang Quan to taste the fate of being deserted by his own people. In her previous life, This father of hers had devised strategies and turned everyone he did not value into chess pieces in his hands, stepping stones for the Jiangfu. Step by step, he had paved the way for Jiang Su to become the empress. Every step of the Jiang family's glory had been forged by stepping on the blood of the three of them, mother and sons. Now, it was time for Jiang Quan to have a taste of this. This kind of struggle with no way out, loneliness and despair, and then suddenly discovering that he had been betrayed by everyone, discovering that he was useless and laughable. Like to play chess? Sure. In this life, she would change the position of the chess player. This game of chess would be written by her, and he would only be the last move of the chess game, a useless chess piece, a useless piece. Jiang Quan abruptly shut his mouth and looked straight at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan's undisguised hatred and crazed gaze fell into his eyes, and he suddenly felt a burst of fear. He did not know where Jiang Ruan's hatred came from. How could a person reveal such a frightening expression, like a man-eating beast? Jiang Quan, do you admit to your crimes? Sun Tzu saw that the commotion was about over, so he slammed the gavel and shouted. Somewhat woodenly, Jiang Quan turned his head back. He looked at Sun Tzu in the hall and suddenly smiled slowly. Standing in the middle, he said somewhat disdainfully, Sun Tzu, why are you pretending to be virtuous and virtuous? We are all officials of the same court, and since we are officials, there is no such thing as innocence. Today, you have treated me like this. I admit that my power is inferior to yours, so I have nothing to say. I will also admit to this crime. But you must remember, I am merely subservient to power. Today, as long as my power is able to contend a little more, no matter what, I will fight for it. When Jiang Ruan heard his words, the corners of her eyes slowly curved downwards, and she smiled faintly. As expected of Jiang Quan, having been an official for so many years, he was able to see the important point at a glance. In today's matter, the witness was actually not the most important, and the material evidence was also not the most important. It all depended on how the case was tried. The attitude that Sun Tzu revealed was the most important. Jiang Quan probably thought that Sun Tzu would not dare to go too far on the account of his colleague, but Sun Tzu's attitude could only explain one thing: someone was supporting Jiang Ruan. No matter who that person was, to be able to make Sun Tzu bend his back, the person's background was certainly not small. When Jiang Quan pleaded guilty, he even held back a trick. He pretended to plead guilty in such a magnanimous manner, but his last few sentences caused people to involuntarily think of other things. Even if he pleaded guilty, he still took the opportunity to splash a basin of dirty water on Jiang Ruan and Sun Tzu. This was really sinister. But why would Jiang Quan do such a thing? Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. Jiang Quan had never been one to waste time on useless things. Since he had already admitted his crime, what was the use of this kind of insignificant splashing of dirty water? This kind of behavior was like that of an incompetent person who had no way of dealing with anything, and in Jiang Ruan's eyes, she only felt that it was ridiculous. She slowly stood up and walked to Jiang Quan's side. Everyone silently watched this pair of father and daughter. Jiang Quan was agitated, his old face flushed red and distorted. His originally thin and protruding cheekbones were now somewhat black, and he no longer had the appearance of a dashing and confident young official. On the other hand, Jiang Ruan was in the prime of her youth. She was born with snow-white skin and a beautiful face, but her expression was very calm, and even carried a trace of a gentle smile. Between these two people, one was ugly and one was beautiful, one was manic and one was calm, one was angry and one was smiling. There was really not a trace of father-daughter relationship between them. Jiang Ruan walked to stand in front of Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan stared angrily at her. His gaze contained anger and resentment, and even a trace of fear, but there was really not a trace of warmth to be found. Jiang Ruan was already used to it. She stopped in front of Jiang Quan and suddenly sighed. She said softly, "So, even the minister Jiang, who has always been ambitious and pure to the bones, will have a moment when he succumbs to power." Her words were full of sighs, but they were like a fierce hammer that fiercely pounded on Jiang Quan's heart. Vaguely, what appeared before his eyes was the time when he was flushed with success and had become an upstart in the court. Even though his ambition was as big as the heavens, his luck was as thin as paper. He had always wanted to put on an appearance of being pure and untainted by the secular world, but now, he had to voluntarily admit that he had prostrated before the footsteps of power. This was a fatal blow to him, and also an unbearable humiliation. And this humiliation came from his daughter, whom he had crushed from the bottom of his heart into the mud. The more glorious Jiang Yuan was, the more Jiang Quan felt that his current position was lowly. From the bottom of his heart, he was a cowardly and hypocritical person. He had always valued the way others looked at him, so he had spent so many years to forge himself into an honest and upright person. At this moment, when this outer layer of skin was torn apart, Jiang Quan could no longer bear it. He felt as if he could not breathe and directly fainted. The two officials hurriedly took Jiang Quan away. Sun Tzu slammed the gavel and shouted, "The criminal subject Jiang Quan pleads guilty in court. He conspired with the concubine, Xia Shi, to murder his first wife and cruelly harm his children. His heinous crimes are unpardonable. The evidence of his crimes is clear and witnessed by thousands of people. A country has its laws, and a family has its rules." Outside, the crowd of onlookers who were watching the commotion immediately flared up. Zhao Guang clenched his fists tightly. Today, he had already restrained himself very well. However, even though he had heard Jiang Quan plead guilty and knew that he would definitely not be able to escape the blame, Zhao Guang still could not stop himself from losing control. Zhao Yuanjia comforted him, but Zhao Yuanping and Zhao Yuanfeng looked at each other, their gazes somewhat heavy. Jiang Yuan stood indifferently on the spot as she watched Jiang Quan being dragged away. Slowly, she lowered her eyes. Was it over just like that? Of course not. Chapter 203. In a corner of the palace, Jiang Dan changed her usual leisurely attitude and became somewhat anxious. Even her personal palace maid could see that something was wrong with her. She forcefully sat down on the chair again and slowly grasped the back of the chair. The palace maid finally could not help but say, "Your ladyship is worried about Minister Zhang's matter? Your ladyship should pay attention to your body. If His Majesty knew, he would also be worried." Jiang Ruan's expression changed. She reluctantly squeezed out a smile and sighed, "I just did not expect Dejie to be so heartless. In any case, he is my biological father. How could he be so heartless? Although Ben Gong and father are not very close, it is still somewhat unbearable to watch him fall into such a situation." As she said this, she seemed to be worried and pressed the center of her forehead. "Your ladyship is too kind," the palace maid could not help but advise, "it's just that right now, you should take good care of yourself." Jiang Dan waved her hand and shook her head, "Ben Gong understands. You can withdraw first." The palace maid looked at Jiang Dan worriedly and retreated, leaving Jiang Dan alone in the large hall. She occasionally used her nails to slide down the armrest of the chair, her expression somewhat sinister. Jiang Quan had already been sent to prison. She did not expect that Jiang Ruan's ability was so great that after so many years, she could still produce evidence. At present, it was only Jiang Quan who was involved, but at that time, Butterfly also knew that she had worked for Xia Yan. Why did she not reveal this matter? Butterfly naturally would not keep it a secret for Jiang Dan. In fact, Jiang Dan had already guessed the possibility that Jiang Ruan had deliberately suppressed this fact. She already knew that she was the one who had poisoned her and Zhao Mei. As soon as she thought of this, Jiang Dan felt extremely guilty. She was very clear about Jiang Ruan's methods. From the daughter of a mountain village that no one had ever paid any attention to the current Jining Wangfei that no one dared to look down on, Jiang Ruan had practically swallowed up the minister's fu bite by bite, eradicating the people who opposed her. Jiang Ruan did not recognize even her own kin and haggled over every little thing. How could she let her off? The reason why there was no movement now must be because she had a backup plan. The more Jiang Dan thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but bite her lower lip. After a moment, she suddenly ordered her trusted aide, Zhu, to come in and said, "I have something to tell you." At the same time, on the horse carriage on the way back to the Fu, Jin San asked Jiang Yuan in puzzlement, "Since young Furen knows that Jiang Zhaoyi is also the culprit who harmed Furen, why did you not take advantage of the situation and let the butterflies bite her out?" Even for imperial concubines, as long as the life of an official's wife was involved, they would have to go through the trial themselves. Even the emperor could not intervene. Why did young madam let her off? "I won't let her off." Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "I just don't want to let her off so easily." There were too many loopholes in Butterfly's story. The reason why Jiang Quan had been caught was because Xiao Xiao had interfered in the matter. Moreover, Jiang Quan's career seemed to have reached its end. He did not have much influence in the imperial court, so His Majesty would not have too many objections to this. However, Jiang Dan had been implicated. She was currently favored, and if someone were to carefully examine this case, it wouldn't be difficult to find suspicious points. Don't forget, the butterfly and the so-called evidence were all created by us. It's impossible to not leave any traces behind. Jin San thought for a while before he nodded and said, "Even so, it would be a pity to give up on this opportunity." Does young madam already have a good idea? Jiang Dan has a suspicious temperament. Although her actions are ruthless, after so many years, she is still cowardly and timid. She is afraid that the matter will be exposed, so she is probably running around in circles in the palace right now. In her anxiety, how could she have the time to ponder over the strangeness of this case? Her mind is probably filled with thoughts on how to avoid being discovered. Jin San, after we return to the Fu, arrange a few embroidered uniform guards to protect Jiang Quan in secret. Before Jiang Quan is sentenced, he cannot be silenced. Jiang Dan instructed. Jin San was shocked, she actually wants to silence him. As he spoke, a trace of disdain flashed in his eyes. This kind of woman, in order to protect herself, would actually do such a thing. It's no wonder that she would make a move against the former madam. However, although young madam protected Jiang Quan, what will happen after that? Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "I don't want to take the initiative to make a move. Once I take the initiative, I will be the first to expose myself. What I need to do now is to lure the snake out of its hole. The more anxious she is, the easier it is for her to make a mistake. I will lure her into taking action, but in the end, she will be the one buried in the grave." Her words were gentle, but Jin San felt as if there was an indifferent chill in them. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Looking at Jiang Ruan's sweet smile, he understood that she had a well-thought-out plan, so he simply put his heart at ease. When they returned to the Jiang Fu, unexpectedly, there were a few unfamiliar guards at the Fu's entrance. Although these guards were only dressed in the ordinary attire of the Fu's imperial guards, Jiang Yuan could tell at a glance that there was something different about them. She had always been good at observing the details. These guards had solemn expressions and orderly appearances, and even the embroidered uniform guards were not inferior. Jiang Yuan frowned. In any case, she had stayed in the palace for so many years in her previous life, and these people looked somewhat like the imperial guards. Seeing her approach, the guards nodded their heads and said, "Your subordinates greet the Wang Fei." Jin San and Tian Zhu's expressions changed slightly. It was Steward Lin who had jogged over. When he saw Jiang Yuan, he was also slightly stunned, as if he had not expected her to return so early. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Young madam, why are you so early?" Pretending not to see the abnormality in these people, Jiang Ruan's manner was calm as she said, "I am a little tired. Steward Lin, I will go to the study to sit. If there is anything, let's wait for Xiao Xiao to return first." At the mention of the study, Steward Lin paused again. Among the surrounding unfamiliar guards, the leader of the imperial guards suddenly spoke, "Wang Fei, do you want to go to the study?" Jiang Yuan ignored him, as if she had not heard him at all. She only lifted her feet and walked in the direction of the Fu's study. The expression of the leader of the Imperial Guards changed, and he immediately blocked Jiang Ruan's way. In a low voice, he said, "Will the Wang Fei please step aside?" Jiang Ruan looked at him quietly. Her gaze was calm, as if there was not a trace of prayer in it. She just looked at that person indifferently. That person was finally somewhat speechless under her gaze. Jiang Ruan then said indifferently, "Steward Lin, is this the new Imperial Guard? He does not know the rules. This subordinate is not a new Imperial Guard." That leader of the Imperial Guards had been around for many years. What kind of high officials and nobles had he not seen? As long as there were some officials, they would still have to give him some face. This was the first time that he had unhesitatingly slapped someone's face. However, although he was somewhat embarrassed, his temper was still good. He did not have a one-track mind to argue with Jiang Ruan. His expression was also very humble. "Is there something strange here?" Jiang Ruan smiled, "Since you are an Imperial Guard of the Outer Fu, you are an outsider. Outsiders still want to meddle in the affairs of Jinying Wang Fu. Even if your master's influence is extensive, as long as his surname is not Shao, he will not be able to meddle here." Jiang Ruan said indifferently. That Imperial Guard was startled and looked at Jiang Ruan inquiringly. Jiang Ruan's expression was calm as she met his gaze. That person's heart became alert. He knew that Jiang Ruan roughly understood the identity of the person inside. But even so, how could she still dare to? Jiang Ruan's heart was cold. She indeed seemed to have guessed the identity of the person inside. Although she did not understand, she felt more of a faint disgust. On a normal day, she would most likely just avoid it and walk away. But now that it was related to Jinying Wang Fu, she was unhappy. Although the main culprit in her previous life was not that person, since then, she had always been extremely disgusted with the people of this ancestral shrine. In this life, she would avoid them if she could. Who would have thought that they would still be mixed together? But on what basis did he have the qualifications to meddle in other people's lives? Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, but that smile was not gentle. It carried a trace of unquestionable strength. "This Imperial Guard of the Outer Fu, can you step aside now?" That Imperial Guard originally wanted to directly refuse, but when he met Jiang Ruan's gaze, he suddenly could not bring himself to say anything. He recalled that the woman in front of him was even able to sue her own father in court. This kind of woman who did not put worldly etiquette in her eyes must have a very insolent temperament. "Young madam, please enter." It was Steward Lin who spoke. He said, "The Wang Fu is your home. You can go wherever you want to go. Why can't you go to your own home? Young master is in the study. Young madam must have worked hard today. Later, this old servant will ask the kitchen to send some sweet soup." Steward Lin spoke with a smile, but the leader of the Imperial Guards looked at him in disbelief and said, If there's anything, I will bear the responsibility." Steward Lin was somewhat impatient. "Besides, what young madam said is not wrong. The Shao family's matters have nothing to do with you. It's better if outsiders do not interfere." These words were somewhat unyielding and could even be said to be rude. Although Steward Lin was usually unreliable when it came to Shao's matters, as a steward, he was still very tactful. It was very unusual for him to speak in such a merciless manner today. The Imperial Guards behind the leader of the Imperial Guards were somewhat indignant, seemingly dissatisfied that their master had suffered such humiliation. They almost wanted to jump up and argue. Unexpectedly, Jin San and Tian Zhu suddenly blocked in front of Jiang Ruan. Their expressions were also slightly vigilant as they said to Jiang Ruan, "Young madam, please go over first, in case you catch a cold by standing here." Everyone in Jinying Wang Fu knew that they were protective of their shortcomings, but they did not expect that they would be so protective of a Wang Fei who had just married. The Imperial Guards had never received such treatment in their lives, and for a moment, they were very angry. But to make a move in Jinying Wang Fu was certainly not beneficial. There were countless secret guards of the embroidered uniform guard here, so they could only watch angrily as Jiang Ruan swaggered away. Steward Lin followed by Jiang Ruan's side, and as he walked, his expression was grave and stern. He had always been lively and cheerful, but this was the first time he had been so nervous. He said, "Young madam, since you entered the Wang Fu, you are a member of the Shao family. You are one with the young master. You should also know a little about the young master's matters." He had something to say, so Jiang Ruan did not speak and waited for Steward Lin to continue. Sure enough, Steward Lin continued, "These years, the young master has not had an easy time. Outsiders can only see his external glory, but this old servant has seen the young master's appearance since he was a baby. This old servant has watched him grow up. It's just that the young master is not used to telling everything." At that time, not long after the old Wang Ye and Wang Fei met with an accident, the young master took over the embroidered uniform guard and went to the southern frontier alone. He came back alive, but he was half dead. Xia Wu treated the scars on his body for 3 whole days without rest. There are many people in the capital who want the young master's life. Some are from the southern frontier, some are from the Jin dynasty, and there are all kinds of people. In order to protect the embroidered uniform guard, the young master has suffered a lot over the years. Now, seeing him marry a wife, this old servant is very gratified. With his temperament, he probably doesn't care about anything and has lived his whole life for the sake of his mission. Now that he finally has something that he wants to hold on to, he appears to be a little more like an ordinary young man. Steward Lin looked at Jiang Ruan and the beard at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Young madam is a good girl. When I heard Jin San and the others say that the young master treated young madam differently, this old servant knew that only young madam could help him. Although our Jinying Wang Fu is invincible and has stood tall in the Jin dynasty for so many years, there seems to be nothing that can knock it down, but there are too many things that it has to bear. Ordinary young ladies would not be able to bear it, but young madam can." As they spoke, the two of them arrived at the door of the study. Steward Lin stopped in his tracks and looked at Jiang Ruan seriously and solemnly. "Young madam, in this world, only you are able to stand shoulder to shoulder with him." Jiang Ruan followed suit and stopped in her tracks. The door of the study was not closed and was left ajar. Unexpectedly, there was not a single guard outside. It was obvious that they had deliberately sent everyone away to stop here. The voice of the person inside clearly reached their ears. One of the voices was deep and abnormally familiar, with a kind of arrogance that came from someone who was used to bossing people around. However, at this moment, it was probably because he was exasperated that his voice was somewhat unsteady and had completely lost his usual grace. In a heavy tone, he said, "Don't persist in going about things the wrong way. What's so good about that woman? Now that all the civil and military officials in the court know that she has accused her biological father, how will the common people of the great Jin dynasty view her? How will others view you? We originally thought that as long as you liked her, as long as she lived her days in peace, we would tolerate it. But look at her, how can she stir up such a big storm? Pushing you to the heart of the storm, how can you still look like a wife?" As soon as he arrived, he heard the accusation against Jiang Ruan. Steward Lin blushed with shame and could not help but turn his head to sneak a glance at Jiang Ruan's expression. Jiang Ruan's expression was calm, and she did not feel the slightest discomfort from being scolded. Even when she heard the voice, she did not show the slightest bit of surprise, as if she had long known who the person inside was. Jiang Ruan listened silently. The person inside was indeed as she had imagined, the current emperor. At that time, even before she and Xiao Xiao had gotten married, she had felt that the emperor treated Xiao Xiao differently, including Empress Dowager Ida. However, what was certain was that these two people's attitudes towards Xiao Xiao were extremely tolerant. This was also why even though the old Jinying Wang couple had committed the crime of rebellion, Xiao Xiao was still safe and sound, and even had the emperor's trust. Although she was not clear about the reason, Jiang Ruan could faintly guess that this was not because the emperor was a wise ruler of his generation, appointing people based on talent. How could he allow others to sleep soundly on his side couch? In fact, no emperor would tolerate the descendants of rebellious ministers to enter the court alive and become officials. There must be a reason for this. Following the emperor's furious voice was Xiao Xiao's cold and indifferent voice, Your Majesty, this is this official's family matter. Shut up. The emperor seemed to have been stabbed. Don't forget what your surname is. Your surname is not Xiao. The blood that flows in your body is the blood of the Xian family. What family matter? Your family matter is Zhen's family matter. Jiang Ruan's eyes widened in shock. Even though she had never revealed her emotions, she could not help but be absent-minded when she heard these words. The words of the person inside were incomparably clear, and there was almost no possibility that she had heard wrongly. She had thought of thousands of possibilities, but she had never imagined that it would be like this. Xiao Xiao, Xian Xiao. Your Majesty, why do you insist on acting your own way? Xiao Xiao's tone was indifferent. This official has no relationship with the imperial family. Your Majesty, please be careful with your words. His words were also very cold, almost very provocative. This is not up to you to decide. The emperor snorted coldly. Zhen has done so much for you, hiding you in Jinying Wangfu for so many years without restoring your identity and secrets, all in order to pave the way. There will be a day when the empire of the great Jin dynasty will be handed over to your hands. You will be a member of the imperial family, the future heir to the throne of the great Jin dynasty. How dare you say that there is no relationship? Housekeeper Lin lowered his head, not daring to look at Jiang Ruan's expression. Jiang Ruan clenched her fists and slowly calmed down. Yes, in her previous life, Xiao Xiao had finally killed Xian Li and sat on the throne. So that was the case. So he was originally a member of the Huang family, and the emperor had originally intended to pass the throne to him? There is a difference between a ruler and a subject. Xiao Xiao was still unmoved. Your Majesty's empire should be handed over to a more talented person. I will not accept your Majesty's arrangements. You, stubborn and thick-headed. The emperor was so angry that he stomped his feet. Suddenly, he thought of something and changed the topic. Is it because of that girl that you insist on refusing the throne? We have heard that you only dote on her. How can this be? We originally thought that you were young and did not understand the pros and cons. Since you truly like that girl, then marrying her would be fine. But now that you only dote on her, how will you convince the masses in the future? The people of the Jin dynasty do not need an emperor who is only infatuated with the love between a man and a woman. I have already said this. As if mentioning Jiang Ruan made Xiao Xiao somewhat unhappy, his tone suddenly became more serious. I do not agree with your arrangements. Your Majesty should choose another brilliant one. Not only was Xiao Xiao somewhat unhappy, but housekeeper Lin's face also showed some displeasure. What kind of existence was Jiang Ruan in Jinying Wangfu now? She was the young madam that everyone publicly acknowledged and greatly admired. What did the emperor mean by beating someone to death with a stick? Even the emperor could not casually deny a person's merits. Moreover, this was the young madam that everyone unanimously agreed was perfect. Inside and outside the room, the three people were all unhappy. Only Jiang Ruan was the calmest. She was not sad because of this. Since ancient times, she had been disliked by the emperor, and she did not care about it in this life or in the past. Ah Xiao, the emperor's tone suddenly softened, as if admitting defeat. Could it be that you have forgotten your father? We have promised him. Your Majesty, Xiao Xiao interrupted him, his tone suddenly becoming sharp. You have also promised my mother. The emperor abruptly stopped speaking. Chapter 205. After an unknown amount of time, the emperor's slightly tired voice could be heard. No matter what, Xiao, you should consider what I said today. Finished speaking, he looked as if he was about to leave the room. Jiang Ruan hurriedly hid with Butler Lin in a room at the side. After watching the emperor leave, Butler Lin looked at Jiang Ruan, hesitated, and said, What does young Furin want to know? There is no harm in asking the young master now. The young master will not hide anything from you. Jiang Ruan nodded, thought for a moment, and then slowly entered the study. In the study, Xiao Xiao sat in front of the table, thinking about something. When he saw her, He was not surprised, and only said, "You heard everything?" Jiang Yuan nodded. Xiao Xiao was a person with martial arts, and his martial arts were not weak. Just now, when she and butler Lin stayed outside, the emperor could not hear their breathing, but Xiao Xiao might have heard it. She was afraid that he had deliberately let her hear it. She sat down beside Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao's collar was inlaid with a black qilin pattern, showing a deep golden luster. It was suffused with a cold light, and it made his expression look very grave. "Ah Wan, I have something to tell you," Xiao Xiao said. Just in time, Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. "I also have something to tell you." Xiao Xiao was slightly stunned, and looked at Jiang Yuan with some doubt. Jiang Yuan looked at the thick booklet on the table. The booklet was neat and tidy, as if to show how often this master read them on a daily basis. Xiao Xiao was attentive and cautious. There were many things that he did not say, but it did not mean that he did not know. The husband and wife each had their own secrets, and Jiang Yuan had always wanted to confess. Now that Xiao Xiao had brought it up first, she felt that it would be better for her to say it first. "Do you remember, when we returned from Jianan Mountain, I said something to you?" Jiang Yuan smiled. "I said that I had something to tell you." Xiao Xiao said, "I remember. What I want to tell you now is this matter." Jiang Yuan sighed, and a trace of disappointment appeared in her eyes. "In fact, I do not know how you will look at me after hearing it. Perhaps you will stay at a respectful distance, or perhaps nothing will happen. But no matter what, I will continue to speak. I think that we should be frank." Her tone was magnanimous. Even if there was a trace of uncertainty and hesitation, she continued after a short pause. "You have probably ordered the embroidered uniform guards to investigate me. The general's mansion's disaster relief rations, the ambush my big brother suffered in the forest, and Great Master Hui Ju. You must have many questions. Sometimes, you even think that I can predict the future. You must also not be aware that because of the harm Xia Yan had done to my mother, I had acted against the Xia family. Even now, I am still obstructing Xianli, including everyone in Li Dong's residence." Xiao Xiao stared at her solemnly. It was true, the things she had said were all things that he had been suspicious of in the past. No matter how powerful the embroidered uniform guards were, they still could not find any clues, and the only possibility seemed too absurd. "You must be very surprised that I seem to have a close relationship with the 13th prince, and that Grand Tutor Lu seems to want to help me. I am always aware of what is happening in the court. Xiao Xiao, this isn't a coincidence." Jiang Yuan looked at him and suddenly laughed, "Because I already knew what would happen. I have personally experienced these things. I have died once, Xiao Xiao." "R1." Xiao Xiao suddenly spoke. He frowned. "You don't have to tell me." Even if it was just a few words spoken casually, it was enough to shock people. Every word spoken was not something that a normal person could accept. However, Jiang Yuan herself did not realize that even though she tried her best to conceal it, when she said these words, her eyes still revealed a peculiar madness. "You don't believe me?" Jiang Yuan asked. "No, I believe you," Xiao Xiao said. "I just feel that if what you want to say makes you feel pain, you don't have to say it. I don't necessarily need to know. I don't care what happened in the past, as long as you are by my side now. You will always be my Wang Fei." His tone was flat, and his expression was cold and without a ripple. However, his eyes quickly flashed a trace of indulgence that was difficult to detect. The comfort in these words warmed her heart. Jiang Yuan looked at him and suddenly smiled, "But I am willing to tell you that there are some things that have been bottled up in my heart for a long time. If you can share some of them with me, I will also feel much more relaxed. At least, it will make me feel that I am not alone in this life." Xiao Xiao was slightly startled and did not speak for a moment. Jiang Yuan paused and slowly said, "The me that you see now should not have been like this. When I was 5 years old, my mother passed away and Xia Yan became the D-mother. On the surface, she treated me very amiably and Jiang Su Su was also very amiable, But the servants always bullied and humiliated me. At that time, I did not understand and only felt that there were many wicked servants in the Fu. It was only later that I understood that if there were no instructions from the master, how would a servant dare to bully the daughter of the Fu? But no matter what, in the end, I was still sent to the rural residence. My eldest brother secretly received a hint from Xia Yan and thought that as long as he left, they would not treat me unfairly. Thus, he left home at a young age, and we, brother and sister, were separated. Later, I lived in the rural residence. Life there was very bad. Everyone forgot that I was actually the daughter of the minister of the secretariat. Many times, my life was worse than that of a servant. Zhang Lan and her daughter plundered all my belongings and ordered me around like a slave. Their family's wastrel son even wanted to fight with me. Jiang Yuan noticed that Xiao Xiao's brows were knitting more and more tightly. She smiled and said, "Presumably, the embroidered uniform guard also told you about these things. You know. That year, I did not meet Imperial Censor Wang, and because of this, I did not receive any redress. I stayed in the rural residence for 8 years. Midway through, I learned that my eldest brother had died on the battlefield. I thought that life was hopeless. The minister of the secretariat in the capital seemed to have thrown me to the back of their minds. I wrote many letters home, but I never received a reply. I thought that I would spend the rest of my life in the rural residence until I died. Who knew that in the 8th year, someone from the capital would come to take me back to the minister of the secretariat? I was very happy, thinking that my father finally remembered me. She spoke without rhyme or reason. If it had been an ordinary person, they would certainly not have understood what she was saying. However, Xiao Xiao only quietly stared at her. His gaze seemed to be intertwined with complex emotions. His hand, which was wearing a wrist guard, was tightly clenched into a fist. He did his best to suppress the shock in his heart and looked at her as calmly as possible. I was taken back to the minister of the secretariat. In front of the gates of the secretariat, under the attention of all the onlookers, I was dressed in rags and completely without any etiquette. Like a beggar, I accepted Xia Yan and Jiang Su's affectionate greetings. The more pure and kind she was like a fairy, the more dirty I appeared. At that moment, I felt deeply ashamed. Her tone was flat as she said these words, but her fingernails dug deeper and deeper. Not long after I returned to the capital, it was the annual Lantern Festival. On the Ling Long boat, you did not come that time, but all the aristocratic children in the capital were there. Jiang Su asked me to dance so that I would not lose face for the minister of the secretariat. She told me that I only needed to dance the songs and dances that were usually performed at banquets in the rural residence to liven things up. That day, I fell off the Ling Long boat and was fished out, dripping wet. I became the laughingstock of the entire capital. She unconsciously dug her fingernails deeper and deeper. Even when blood appeared, she was completely unaware. In this world, there were many injuries that would not fade with the passage of time. If she did not think about it, it would not hurt, but every time she thought about it, every memory would be filled with pain and unwillingness. At this moment, a slender and slightly cool hand reached over and gently pried open the fingers that she had dug deep into her palm. Afraid that she would hurt herself again, he wrapped her small hand in his own slender palm. Jiang Yuan looked at his actions in a daze. Only when she felt the warmth in her palm did she understand. She took a deep breath and her expression gradually calmed down. Later on, Jiang Su and I attended various gatherings in the name of the minister's Fu's daughter. Xia Yan hired a teacher for me, but she never taught me how to read, write, or manage the household chores. She only said that women did not need to learn these things, and only asked me to learn how to sing, dance, and play the zither. I did not know anything. Every day, when I went out with Jiang Su, outsiders would only praise her for her outstanding beauty and skills, but to me, she was a vulgar and unfashionable idiot beauty. Later on, the reputation of an idiot beauty also disappeared. I don't know when, but rumors started to spread in the capital. Earlier on in the rural residence, the matter of Chen Zhao bullying me was also brought up. They said that I was young and did not know how to respect myself, that I knew how to seduce men, and that I had lost my virtue. At that time, I was about to reach marriageable age, and my reputation was already a complete mess. Xiao Xiao slowly put his arm around her shoulders and pulled half of her body to lean against his chest. Only when he pulled her into his embrace did he realize that Jiang Ruan's body was as stiff as a block of wood. Her whole body was stretched taut, as if she was extremely nervous. Xiao Xiao patted her back, and the gentleness of comforting a child caused her to relax a little. Jiang Ruan continued, "When my reputation was so bad, there was only one person who treated me with the same kindness, and that was Xianli." Xiao Xiao was startled. A trace of sorrow flashed through Jiang Ruan's tone. "That day at Ling Long Boat, when I made a fool of myself, he also disregarded everyone's gazes and came to comfort me. From then on, I thought that he was a kind and gentle person. Later on, he often came to the minister's fu to talk to Jiang Quan, and he would also bring me some small gifts. He never called me an idiot beauty like others did, and he also never looked at me strangely. When Jiang Su Su and I appeared at the same time, he would not only have Jiang Su Su in his eyes and ignore me. At that time, I was truly happy. The year I reached the age of Ji, His Majesty wanted to summon a new batch of beautiful women to enter the palace. Any concubine daughter of an official's family could also enter the palace. However, at that time, the Jiang and Xia families were rising steadily, and the emperor was already feeling apprehensive. In the name of the concubine selection, it was better to say that they had been thrown into the palace as hostages to warn the minister's fu. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were only concubine daughters, so it was not important, and the emperor would also not be satisfied. Jiang Quan blocked Jiang Su Su's portrait and submitted mine. Xiao Xiao stroked her hair. Even now, when she spoke of this matter, there was a trace of deep self-mockery in her tone. Perhaps, in both her previous and current lives, Jiang Ruan had not been able to understand one thing, and that was why Jiang Quan had treated her so. As biological father and daughter, no matter how indifferent he was, he should not have treated her this way. It was as if he treated an outsider better than her. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. Jiang Quan and she, perhaps, had formed an old grudge in their previous lives, but in this life, they had to use the name of father and daughter to settle the score. I was not willing to enter the palace, did not want to live with a man I had never met, and did not want to fight and scheme with a group of women in the depths of the palace. However, Jiang Quan said that if I did not go, the entire minister's fu would be buried along with my willfulness. At that time, Xian Li also advised me. He said that he would be able to protect me in the palace, and that one day, he would make me his legitimate wife. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows without batting an eyelid. He probably felt that Xian Li's words were a little too arrogant. Now, Xian Li's wife was not Jiang Ruan. The competition between men had never been based on big talk, but on real ability. I did not understand the fickleness of human nature, so I believed him. I volunteered to replace Jiang Su Su and enter the palace as a concubine. Jiang Ruan paused. In her ears, it seemed that before entering the palace, the clothes made by the people in the minister's fu, or the loving and grateful faces, every word made her feel disgusted. If she had known that later on, she would have died for the sake of such a group of ruthless jackals and wolves, even if she had to die, she would have dragged the entire minister's fu to the crime of deceiving the monarch to make amends. The days in the palace were the darkest days of my life. I was ridiculed by the imperial concubines, bullied by the palace maids, and everyone knew that I was not favored. Sometimes, I was even treated as a dancer of His Majesty's favored concubine. Even if I had a rank, no one paid any attention to me. I did not have a family that I could rely on. In order to show their loyalty, the minister's fu would not interfere in the affairs of the inner palace and would never give me any support. They even hoped that I would die, so that perhaps they could win a trace of the emperor's remorse. She seemed to have thought of something as she smiled slightly. Later, the emperor gave Pei-er to me and raised him under my name. Pei-er was also an unfavored prince in the palace. We were neglected, and I was very grateful. Perhaps he was a gift from the heavens in my previous life. Knowing that I would not be able to hold on by myself, he gave me such a child. Xiao Xiao's gaze moved slightly as he suddenly understood why Xian Pei was so attached to Jiang Yuan. Just as Guan Liang Han had unintentionally said, Pei was like a nestling clinging to its mother. If it was a mother and son from a previous life, it would indeed be the same in this life. But if that was the case, could it be that Pei also had memories of his previous life? Up until now, Xiao Xiao had heard that Jiang Ruan's past was very tragic. He was unable to understand everything that Jiang Ruan had encountered. He was even more unable to imagine that this powerful woman in front of him, who did not care about anything, had also had a time of helplessness and despair. Xian Li had his great ambitions to accomplish. He hoped that I would be an obedient chess piece in the palace, and that some of the things that were inconvenient for him to do could be done through my hands. Later on, he really did achieve this. That day, they killed the emperor, but pushed all the blame on me. They said that I had poisoned his majesty and that I was a demoness who would bring calamity to the country. Sweat gradually seeped out of her palms, but her body was somewhat cold. They pushed me down from the 9 high steps, and my father personally ordered people to capture me. He simply did not protect me as he said he would. All he wanted was a stone to pave the road. When the road was paved, the stone would be useless. R1. Xiao Xiao could not help but hug her tightly. He was shocked and distressed by her words, but he could not do anything. He could only comfort her at this moment. But only he himself knew that at that moment, to Jiang Yuan, his comfort was of no use at all. Xiao Xiao, do you think that this is the end? Jiang Yuan shook her head and smiled. My hell has just begun. I was sent to the heavenly prison, and someone rescued me from the cells of the condemned prisoners. I thought that escaping with my life was the beginning of the torture. Jiang Su Su told me that there were more than 100 lives in the General Fu, and all of them were executed as traitors after Xian Li ascended to the throne. She told me that eldest brother had been killed, and mother had also been killed. The main culprit was what I thought were my sisters and relatives. She said that she was already displeased that I had occupied the title of daughter for too long. On that day, she pierced my eyes, chopped off my nose, pulled out my tongue, chopped off my limbs, and turned me into a human swine. Xiao Xiao, as the master of the brocade guards for so many years, you should know what a human swine is. I am like a swallowed monster, and just looking at me makes people feel disgusted. R1. Xiao Xiao could not help but shout. He took a deep breath. He had always known that a strong heart must have come from a very deep torment. Jiang Quan's strength was different from ordinary people, and he must have suffered a lot of pain that ordinary people would not have experienced. But all his speculations could not compare to Jiang Ruan's pain at this moment. At this moment, he empathized with her and deeply understood Jiang Ruan's pain and despair. He understood why Jiang Ruan had always hated the Xia family and Jiang Quan so much. If it were him, his hatred would not be any less than Jiang Ruan's. Xiao Xiao, who had always been indifferent and unmoved by anything, actually felt a trace of panic. If he lost Jiang Ruan, what would happen? Jiang Ruan did not move and let him hug her tightly. She slowly said. Later, she wanted someone to hand me over to Li Dong. In the Prime Minister's Fu, before my eyes, I saw Li Dong. She was finally unable to speak, and her voice was already choked with sobs. I can endure anything, if it was directed at me, I would accept it. But they didn't even let my child off. In this lifetime, I will never forgive them. I will always remember the pain they brought me. In this lifetime, I am here for revenge. She looked at Xiao Xiao and slowly said, in the 18th year of Xuanda, Jiang Su Su became the empress, Jiang Quan became a first-class official, the Xia family's chickens and dogs ascended to heaven, and I died. I died at the hands of the servants of the Prime Minister's Fu. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the rural residence. I rejoiced that this was a chance given to me by the heavens. I worked hard to climb up, met Imperial Censor Wang, saved my eldest brother, and brought him to the General's Fu to avoid disaster. Everything I did was to prevent what happened in my previous life from happening again. Everything I did was to return to collect a debt of blood. She looked at Xiao Xiao, and tears gradually welled up in her eyes. I am a dead person, Xiao Xiao, do you understand? These words made one's heart jump, but Xiao Xiao only looked at her, and suddenly pulled her into his embrace again. He hugged her tightly, and in his embrace, she was as weak as a newborn beast, and could be easily broken by others. He gritted his teeth, and the expression on his elegant face was one of forbearance. He clenched his teeth with all his might, and the rims of his eyes were somewhat red. However, his tone was flat, and he still used his usual unquestionable expression. I understand, but I don't care. You are my wife, and you are a member of the Shao family. I will not hate you because of this, and I will not feel that you are an anomaly. I only regret that in my previous life, I did not meet you earlier. He took a deep breath, and then continued, I regret that in my previous life, I missed you, and that you suffered so much. Jiang Yuan stared blankly, and slowly reached out to hug his waist. Half smiling and half sighing, she said, Fool, what does this have to do with you? The master of the embroidered uniform guard, who had always been cold-blooded and invincible, was not the slightest bit unhappy when someone called him a fool. At this moment, Xiao Xiao only wanted to protect the person in front of him forever. As long as he thought about how, in some unknown lifetime, he had lost the person in front of him, his heart would ache so much that he could not breathe. And every sentence of Jiang Ruan's downplaying of the pain she had suffered in the past was a death of 1,000 cuts for him in this life. He had never known that his wife had so many secrets. In this life, she had come bearing secrets, and lived for the sake of hatred. In those years when no one knew of her secrets, how lonely she had been. He did not dare to think about it. Jiang Yuan slowly let go of him, and raised her head to look at him. The young man slightly bent over, and his pitch-black eyes were filled with indifference and gentleness like in the past. Just looking at them made people feel at ease. There was not the slightest trace of avoidance or disgust in his gaze. He was so sincere. Jiang Yuan suddenly stretched out her hand to cover his eyes. His long eyelashes brushed past Jiang Yuan's palm, and there was a ticklish sensation. Jiang Yuan slowly closed her eyes and kissed him. Fortunately, in this lifetime, you have not missed anything, and neither have I. Steward Lin sat restlessly outside for a long time. Finally, he decided to see what was going on inside. Cautiously standing at the door of the study, he used a needle to poke a small hole in the window and peered inside. Suddenly, he was stunned. In one breath, he jumped far away and retreated into the courtyard. Jean C looked at him curiously, Old Lin, did young master and young madam quarrel? Why are you hiding? Steward Lin did not hear her words, and only frowned as he thought hard. How could they have ended up kissing? What the young master wanted to talk about should be very serious, and should not have gone off the rails to this extent. But why did young madam want to cover the young master's eyes? Could it be? Old Lin's eyes brightened. The booklet that he had ordered people to hide under the mattress in Xiao Xiao's bedroom had been seen by young madam. Young madam was indeed a heroine, and was good at applying what she had learned. Covering her eyes was very novel, but wasn't it a little too bold in the study? But this was also good. If she could learn from the future young master of Jinying Wangfu early on, that would be the best. She just could not let anyone find out. Steward Lin's complexion changed, and he sternly said to Jean C, young madam and the young master are discussing something very important in the study, do not disturb them. If the emperor, those imperial bodyguards come to cause trouble again, beat them all out. Not just anyone can behave atrociously in the Wangfu. After he finished speaking, he walked towards the kitchen. I have to instruct the cook to make something to nourish the body. I'm afraid that young madam has been working hard. Jean C shrugged his shoulders. Jean Sand popped out from behind and scratched his head. Why do I feel that old Lin is the one who has gone off the rails? Chapter 206. In the 8th Prince's Fu, Xianli threw the letter into the flames. In an instant, the flames licked the words on the paper and turned it into a pile of ashes. The advisor behind him could not help but ask, "Why did your highness refute Jiang Zhaoyi's idea?" Jiang Dan's proposal to join forces with Xianli to overthrow Jinying Wangfu was tempting. Since Jiang Dan had said so, she must have an idea. With Xianli's cautious temperament, he should have listened, but Xianli had rejected Jiang Dan without hesitation. This was really strange. She is anxious now, that's why she can't keep her cool. Presumably, she has something on Jiang Yuan and wants to borrow my hand to deal with Jiang Yuan. At the same time, she also mentioned Jinying Wangfu. What good ideas can she have? Moreover, it's really not worth my help. Xianli looked at the dancing flames. Moreover, this woman is very scheming and has already mixed with Lao Wu. The advisor followed Xianli's gaze and looked at the flames. He knew that it was a secret protection from the palace. For Jiang Dan to have a relationship with Xian Hua in such a short time, it was indeed obvious that she was anxious. The advisor pondered for a moment. Then your highness means just an idiot. Xian Hua absent-mindedly said, it would naturally be good if these two people could join forces to overthrow Jinying Wangfu. Xiao Xiao's existence will always be a stumbling block. There will be a day when I will also get rid of this stone. If someone does it for me, why not? He seemed to find it a little funny. If their skills are inferior, with Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan's temperament, what benefits do you think they can gain? Xianli said, Lao Wu has been an eyesore in the court for a long time. Now, there is Xian Pei. If Lao Wu disappears from this world, it is also a good thing for me. He looked at the golden buttons on his sleeves and said, in any case, I have nothing to lose, why should I get involved in this muddy water? Your highness is wise. The advisor sighed, when the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. In the end, your highness has picked up the benefits. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, however, Jiang Zhaoyi is your highness's person. If she suddenly joins forces with 5th Prince, she can no longer be used by us and has become an abandoned chess piece. In the future, news in the palace. She is already useless. Xianli interrupted him, Yuan Chuan has already entered the palace, what use is Jiang Dan? Why don't you make use of your last chance to help me with something? At least this trip won't be in vain. In this game, it would be better to help me finish this game. Your highness is indeed the best chess player. In the end, it will still be up to your highness to end this game. Jiang Yuan stretched herself and subconsciously hugged the source of warmth in her hands. She opened her eyes in a daze, only to discover that her hands were still wrapped around Xiao Xiao's waist, and Xiao Xiao's peaceful sleeping face was right before her eyes. The sunlight faintly shone through the curtains, clearing her muddled mind a little. Suddenly, she remembered what happened yesterday. In the end, she had kissed Xiao Xiao for some reason. The passion had come so suddenly that Xiao Xiao had taken advantage of her dazed state to carry her out of the study. Perhaps the passion could also dilute some of the pain. In the moment of intense sweat and intimacy, all the painful emotions had been released. And then, Jiang Ruoyi was slightly stunned. She felt an aching pain all over her body, as if she had been ruthlessly crushed. It had to be said that Xiao Xiao was really smart. Things that others had learned several times, he only needed one try to master. It was the same for these things. How could there be such a good coincidence? It almost made her dizzy in that strange sense of bliss. Moreover, this person was usually steady and cold, but she did not know why he was so vile on the bed. Every time he deliberately bullied someone until they could not speak, he would coldly watch them struggle and admit defeat. She propped up her chin with one hand and carefully sized up the young man lying on his side. Xiao Xiao's eyelashes were long and straight, casting a shadow on his face. The bridge of his nose was high and elegant, and his lips were thin and rosy. The sleeping Xiao Xiao looked very quiet. It was hard to imagine that such a quiet and cold person would sweat and move crazily in the night. As long as she had those memories in her mind, she felt a little embarrassed. Just as he was thinking, his hand was suddenly pulled by someone, and he actually fell into a warm embrace. Xiao Xiao's eyes did not open, but his voice was very clear, with a faint satisfaction of a gluttonous woman. He said, "It's still early." "It's not early," Jiang Ruoyi replied casually. She immediately reacted and asked, "You're awake?" Xiao Xiao's lips curved. He opened his eyes to look at her and said, "N." This person seemed to be very mischievous when he was not in front of his subordinates. Occasionally, he was also very childish. He probably thought that teasing others was very fun. In Jiang Ruoyi's eyes, this kind of behavior was very similar to Xian Pei's. It was just that Xian Pei was cute when he did this, but in the eyes of someone like Xiao Xiao, who usually had a cold face, it seemed a little strange. "You!" Jiang Ruoyi pushed him, but Xiao Xiao did not let go. His strength was great, so as long as he used a little bit of skill, Jiang Ruoyi would not be able to do anything. At this moment, she could only lie in his embrace. She thought of something and asked, "Yesterday, I said those things to you, but you were not able to hear them in the end. When do you plan to say it?" Thinking of this matter, Jiang Ruoyi felt very uncomfortable. Yesterday, her emotions were in turmoil. Most likely, when Xiao Xiao carried her back to the room, it was seen by the servants of the Wang Fu. What would those people think? As soon as the Wang Fei returned to the Fu, she couldn't wait to have sex with her mistress in the study. Wasn't this a little too thirsty? As for housekeeper Lin, he was afraid that he would be even more puzzled. They were just talking about a secret, so how did they end up talking about the bed? Now that she had lost all her face, Jiang Ruoyi only felt that it would be even more difficult to establish her prestige in front of the servants. She could not help but sigh in her heart. Xiao Xiao's expression slightly paused and he said, "Yesterday, you were too impatient. I thought you wanted to do something more important." "Something more important?" Jiang Ruoyi glared at him. "What do you mean by something more important?" It was clear that this person harbored ulterior motives. Originally, he had only wanted to gently comfort her, but this fellow had actually taken advantage of her when she was in a difficult situation. Xiao Xiao could not help but laugh again. Jiang Ruoyi glared at him for a while and also laughed. She pushed Xiao Xiao, "All right, get up first. I don't have anything to do today, so I can listen to whatever you want to say." She teased, "Even if you say that you are like me, a person who has also died once, I will not despise you. If you want to listen, I will tell you." Xiao Xiao stroked her hair, "Get up first." After breakfast, Jiang Ruoyi and Xiao Xiao walked to the courtyard. The pavilion in the courtyard was adjacent to a pond. The water in the pond was so green that the bottom could be seen. Red fish swam back and forth in the pond, embellishing the monotonous winter sky. Jiang Ruoyi kept Xiao Xiao's words in her mind. At this moment, she saw that his expression was no longer as relaxed as it had been in the morning. It could even be said to be somewhat gloomy. She also realized that there was something different about this matter, so she just silently followed by his side. "Wan," Xiao Xiao said, "you have paid respects to my parents' memorial tablets." "Yes," Jiang Ruoyi nodded, "on the day of our marriage." On the day she had married into the Jinying Wang Fu, she had personally paid respects to her parents-in-law in front of the memorial tablets of the old Jinying Wang couple. At this moment, hearing Xiao Xiao mention it, she remembered. "Actually, you have not paid respects to them." Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking of, but he slowly said, "There is nothing for you to pay respects to." Jiang Ruoyi was startled and looked at him inquiringly. The meaning of these words was really thought-provoking. Did he mean that the memorial tablets that were enshrined in the ancestral hall were actually not the Jinying Wang couple? Or did he mean something else? Do you remember that one day when you came to the Fu and saw me paying respects to someone here? Xiao Xiao stood with his hands clasped behind his back. At this moment, his tall and straight figure seemed somewhat desolate. That is the person you should be paying respects to. Jiang Ruoyi was startled. She recalled that there had indeed been a day when Xiao Xiao was drunk and had kissed her. It was precisely when she had bumped into Xiao Xiao paying respects to someone. On that day, she had found it strange because it was not the memorial day of the Jining Wang couple. But she could not think of any other reason. Her suspicions at that time had finally been confirmed at this moment. As she pondered over Xiao Xiao's words, she heard Xiao Xiao's voice coming from beside her, "I am not the son of Jining Wang." Jiang Ruoyi raised her head. Xiao Xiao's pitch-black eyes were indescribable as he said, "My father is the crown prince, Hong Shi." Jiang Ruoyi stared blankly for a moment. Then, a monstrous storm set off in her heart. Crown Prince Hong Shi, the eldest son of Empress Dowager Ida, the elder brother of the current emperor, should have been the current ruler of the Great Jin dynasty. However, on the eve of the founding of the dynasty, the crown prince who had died under the trampling of thousands of horses was actually Xiao Xiao's father? Xiao Xiao glanced at Jiang Ruoyi, then turned his face away. He stood at the edge of the pavilion and slowly began to narrate his story. Empress Dowager Ida had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest daughter, Princess Yuanrong, was intelligent, gentle, generous, and appropriate. The second son, Crown Prince Hong Shi, was also famous in the capital at a young age. The current emperor was the youngest, so he was greatly spoiled by his 2 elder brothers. In the end, he was also intelligent. The relationship between the 3 of them had always been good. When the late emperor was alive, he had been rather fearful of Empress Dowager Ida's domineering style. He had even suppressed Empress Dowager Ida's maternal family. Although Empress Dowager Ida's actions were swift and decisive, and she had quite a few tricks up her sleeve in the court, the biggest blow had come from her own husband. The late emperor was afraid that Empress Dowager Ida would monopolize power, so he had always pampered the imperial concubines. He had even intentionally promoted other princes to balance the power. This indeed prevented the possibility of the imperial relatives monopolizing power. However, after the late emperor's death, the originally balanced situation was disrupted. The Great Jin dynasty faced an unprecedented crisis as the 8 princes fought for the throne. Crown Prince Hong Shi was the crown prince in name, but his position was not very stable. Not to mention his 8 ambitious brothers, even among the court officials, there were few who supported him. The late emperor had left a terrible mess for Empress Dowager Ida to clean up, but it was Crown Prince Hong Shi who was in charge of this chaotic country. The 8 brothers each occupied a mountain and wanted to force the Empress Dowager to abdicate. Empress Dowager Ida had no choice but to seek outside help. At that time, one appeared. It was the Princess of Nanjiang. Qiman. Crown Prince Hong Shi was not only truly virtuous and talented, but also had a heart for the world. He was also extremely handsome and had an elegant demeanor. At that time, Nanjiang had not yet been destroyed, so its strength could not be underestimated. This princess had once met Crown Prince Hong Shi when she had come to Great Jin. She had secretly set her heart on him, but unfortunately, Crown Prince Hong Shi had tactfully declined. Crown Prince Hong Shi's crown princess was the #1 female doctor in Great Jin at that time, Xiang Xiaoyuan. Although Xiang Xiaoyuan was not as beautiful as Qiman, she had good medical skills, and her mind was filled with many new and strange things. She was not born into an official's family, but had come from the wilderness. Once, she had helped a first-rank official who was on the verge of death to save his life. It was said that she had performed some kind of surgery and entered the palace to obtain the official position of female doctor. Crown Prince Hong Shi and she were finally able to get married, but it was a good thing that he had finally gotten the beauty. Crown Prince Hong Shi had always been clean in the matters between men and women, and he and Xiang Xiaoyuan were truly in love. Apart from Xiang Xiaoyuan, the crown princess, the concubines and the inner court had all been privately dismissed. How could he agree to the princess of Nanjiang's proposal to divorce Xiang Xiaoyuan and marry the princess? But in Empress Dowager Ida's view, this was not rational. It was true that she was also very fond of Xiang Xiaoyuan's intelligence and breadth of mind, which was different from any other woman's. However, to give up the country for a woman was not a wise ruler. Perhaps Crown Prince Hongxi really was not a competent ruler, and his heart was not ruthless enough, but he was indeed a good husband and a good father. Qi Man had spread the word that if Crown Prince Hongxi agreed, the southern border would lend 100,000 troops to help the great Jin dynasty quell the rebellion of the 8 princes. Crown Prince Hongxi did not agree, but the current emperor was not willing. The emperor and Crown Prince Hongxi had always had a close relationship. The two brothers had always thought of the same thing, even the women they liked. Xiang Xiaoyuan's intelligence was different from any other woman. Crown Prince Hongxi liked her, and so did the emperor. But in Xiang Xiaoyuan's eyes, the emperor was only a little brother. He could only watch as she married his older brother. Perhaps it was because of the jealousy and unwillingness in his heart, or perhaps it was because his heart was more suitable to be an emperor than Crown Prince Hongxi's, but he had promised Qi Man that he would first think of a way for Qi Man to obtain Crown Prince Hongxi, and then send troops to help the great Jin dynasty. The emperor's original intention was actually just a stopgap measure. He thought that it was nothing more than a love affair between a man and a woman. In the end, Crown Prince Hongxi would not suffer any losses. As long as Qi Man was temporarily appeased, after the rebellion of the 8 princes was quelled, he could find a reason to kick Qi Man away. The only variable was Xiang Xiaoyuan. Xiang Xiaoyuan's feelings were different from any other woman in this world. She was particular about how a man could only have one woman in his lifetime. Having 3 wives and 4 concubines was a sin. This was treason in the Jin dynasty, but Crown Prince Hongxi had agreed. No matter how many people had tried to intimidate them, Crown Prince Hongxi's attitude had always been firm. The emperor knew that he could not do what Crown Prince Hongxi had done. He did not ridicule Xiang Xiaoyuan in his heart, but to everyone's shock, the smile on Xiang Xiaoyuan's face was dazzling with happiness. Crown Prince Hongxi had done it. If Xiang Xiaoyuan knew of this, it was unknown how many variables it would cause. But for the sake of the great Jin dynasty, or perhaps for the sake of the emperor's own dark thoughts, he had finally made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. At that time, Xiang Xiaoyuan had just given birth to Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao had just turned 1 month old. On the day of the full moon banquet, countless guests came and went. Chapter 207. How did Qi Man and Crown Prince Hongxi finally roll on the bed? The emperor must have contributed a lot. However, when Xiang Xiaoyuan saw the scene in front of her that day, she didn't fly into a rage as everyone thought. She talked and laughed, and almost didn't make any mistakes. She saved Crown Prince Hongxi's face and made Qi Man, who was provoking and watching the fun, speechless in the end. Xiang Xiaoyuan personally married Qi Man for Crown Prince Hongxi. Xiang Xiaoyuan was hot-tempered and had a possessive desire beyond ordinary people in emotional matters. However, she was also a person who took the general situation into consideration. She understood the priorities of many things and only swallowed the unhappiness in her heart silently. For the peace of the Jin dynasty. Crown Prince Hongxi was schemed against by his own brother and hated Qi Man very much. Xiang Xiaoyuan compromised so much, which made him feel more pity for his wife. Not only did the two not become estranged because of this, but they became more intimate. As for Qi Man, who lived in the palace, they just treated her as if she didn't exist. Everyone underestimated the means of the Princess of Nanjiang, or thought that she was just a woman and couldn't make any waves. Everyone knew that women's jealousy was terrible. Qi Man couldn't stand that her beloved treated her with disdain but spoke softly to other women. Nanjiang country was good at using voodoo. She controlled Xiang Xiaoyuan and planted an extremely terrible voodoo on her. She had wanted to use Xiang Xiaoyuan to control Crown Prince Hongxi, but who knew that Xiang Xiaoyuan would have a fiery temper? She knew that the crown prince of a country, the future heir apparent, could not be controlled by a woman, so she simply left on her own. She had superb medical skills and wanted to find a place to cure the curse herself. If she failed, dying outside would be the best outcome. Fate would always silently deliver a fatal blow. Xiang Xiaoyuan's departure had ultimately become her eternal farewell with Crown Prince Hongxi. She didn't cure the voodoo in the end. Not long after, someone came to the door with Xiang Xiaoyuan's ashes. That person was Mr. Hakone. Mr. Hakone was older than Xiang Xiaoyuan, but he was Xiang Xiaoyuan's apprentice. Before Xiang Xiaoyuan came to the capital, she lived with Mr. Hakone in the deep mountains. Xiang Xiaoyuan taught Hakone Serpent all her medical skills. Hakone Serpent inherited her medical skills and recognized her as his young master. Crown Prince Hongxi suffered a huge blow and was about to kill Qi Man when Empress Dowager Ida stopped him. Qi Man expressed that as long as Crown Prince Hongxi treated her well, she could still lend him the 100,000 soldiers in the southern borders. However, he was rejected by Crown Prince Hongxi. In a moment of bravery, he took Xiao Xiao, who was still in swaddling clothes, out of the pass to quell the rebellion. He only left a letter, saying that the position of emperor was ultimately not suitable for him. However, before that, since Xiang Xiaoyuan had already sacrificed herself for the greater good, he had to hand the country safely into the hands of the emperor. How the crown prince, who ruled the country and pacified the world, took the lead in the rebellion of the 8 princes and swept away all obstacles was recorded in the history books. It was just that the bitterness of the war could not be recorded in the books. Crown Prince Hongxi himself had paid a great price. In the final battle, he had captured the enemy troops, but at the last moment, he was surrounded by 100,000 soldiers of the southern wilderness. Those soldiers had come for him. Crown Prince Hongxi would rather die than submit, fighting to the end. In the end, he died under the trampling of the army. And the little prince also died in that war. But in fact, Xiao Xiao did not die. Long before that, Crown Prince Hongxi had a premonition that the southern wilderness was likely to encounter such a thing midway. Therefore, he swapped Xiao Xiao out, replacing him with another baby. The real Xiao Xiao was raised in the Jinying Wangfu. Although Crown Prince Hongxi was dead, the rebellion of the 8 princes was finally quelled in a tragic way by his desperate fighting style. The emperor ascended to the position, and this chaotic struggle finally came to an end. The emperor had just ascended to the throne, and his foundation was not stable. Crown Prince Hongxi's few old subordinates were also almost sacrificed when quelling the rebellion. Empress Dowager Ida had no choice but to marry Princess Yuanrong out to gain support. And after the emperor sat firmly on the throne, the first thing he did was to destroy the Nanjiang kingdom that had caused all this. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The princess of the Nanjiang kingdom had bullied them too much, so she had to pay with their land and the blood of their people. The Nanjiang kingdom was destroyed, but the whereabouts of the princess were not found. And the dead people would not come back to life. Time gradually passed, and the great Jin dynasty gradually stabilized. The old ministers were buried, and the new ministers entered the court. The number of people who could remember the tragic struggle for the throne was already very few. It seemed that everyone had come to the conventional view that the great Jin dynasty had been handed over to the current emperor by the previous emperor. There was no such thing as Crown Prince Hongxi, and there was no such thing as Princess Yuanrong. History only recorded the victors, and those who were sacrificed were always brushed aside. But there were always people who remembered, and Jinying Wangfu was one of them. Jinying Wangfu and Jinying Wangfei were the old subordinates of Crown Prince Hongxi. Rather than subordinates, it was better to say that they were close friends. Crown Prince Hongxi made a lot of friends and was righteous. Jinying Wangfu had been greatly indebted to him. Jinying Wangfu had always been a part of Crown Prince Hongxi's power. Crown Prince Hongxi had entrusted Xiao Xiao to Jinying Wangfu before the accident. He did not keep Xiao Xiao in the palace, and also instructed Jinying Wangfu to keep the secret of Xiao Xiao's identity. Perhaps he did not want his own flesh and blood to walk the same path as him. Living in the royal family might look glamorous, but who knew the helplessness within? Perhaps being born in the marketplace was a bit more joyful. Jinying Wangfu and his wife really kept their word, unexpectedly announcing to the outside world that Xiao Xiao was their flesh and blood. Afterwards, the two of them did not conceive another child, and they truly did like Xiao Xiao. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Xiao had grown from a babbling child to a cold youth. However, one day, his identity was exposed. The people of the southern border seemed to have mixed into the capital, and they seemed to be people who knew about that matter back then. Gradually, assassins began to appear at Xiao Xiao's side. At the same time that the people of the southern border seemed to have discovered his identity, the emperor finally found him. At that time, if Crown Prince Hongxi had not died, the present emperor should have been succeeded by Crown Prince Hongxi. The emperor had always felt guilty that his unintentional actions had caused the deaths of Xiang Xiaoyuan and his elder brother. After so many years, he had thought that Xiao Xiao had long died. He did not want to discover that the person who had originally died was actually living right under his eyes. Naturally, he wanted to groom Xiao Xiao as the future heir apparent. However, Jinying Wangfu and the emperor were at loggerheads. Jinying Wangfu abided by the promise he had made with Crown Prince Hongxi. He would never allow Xiao Xiao's identity to be exposed, nor would he allow Xiao Xiao to return to the palace. The emperor was furious, but he could do nothing. At that time, Xiao Xiao still did not know of his past. Coincidentally, there was a rebellion in the capital by the accomplices of the original rebels. The rebels rebelled, and the emperor gave Jinying Wangfu a difficult problem. He did not give him the military seal and wanted him to quell the rebellion. Originally, he wanted to use this matter to blackmail Jinying Wangfu. He did not expect that Jinying Wangfu would leave the capital to quell the rebellion that very night. He believed that a gentleman would die for his bosom friend. A real man should die a worthy death. Jinying Wangfu was also a wonderful person. In this war that was doomed to fail, he ultimately still managed to trick the emperor. He used a secret order to mobilize the brocade guards to assume a rebellious posture. Jinying Wangfu died on the way to quell the rebellion. However, the matter of the brocade guards' rebellion in the capital was still buzzing. Jinying Wangfu used his own life to protect Xiao Xiao's secret. From then on, Xiao Xiao was a rebel. If he wanted to enter the court, there would inevitably be a lot of resistance. If the emperor wanted to make arrangements, it would not be so simple. More importantly, Xiao Xiao himself would not be willing. And those people of the southern border who had become aware of this would inevitably be confused by this matter. Even if it was a short period of time, it was enough for Xiao Xiao to grow. Jinying Wangfei revealed everything about Xiao Xiao's life. The next day, she hanged herself and left with Jinying Wangfu. In one night, Xiao Xiao encountered great changes. In one night, the illustrious Wangfu became a rebel, and his life was full of twists and turns. Jinying Wangfu and his wife treated him with sincerity. After so many years, they had already formed a relationship that was no different from their own flesh and blood. Even so, they suddenly discovered that their parents were other people. For him, this could not be said to not be shocking. The brocade guards had always been under the command of Jinying Wangfu, but Jinying Wangfu was Crown Prince Hongxi's man. Rather than saying that these 100,000 brocade guards were left to Xiao Xiao by Jinying Wangfu, it would be better to say that many years ago, Crown Prince Hongxi had left them to Xiao Xiao. It was just that before that, Xiao Xiao had not accepted the brocade guards, and the brocade guards would not obey a young master for no reason. In that short few years, Xiao Xiao had learned the art of assassins from Jia Nanshan. He grew rapidly and finally won the approval of the brocade guards. He was able to use the token to mobilize the soldiers. And the first thing that he wanted to do was to take revenge. The Nanjiang country was like a centipede, dead but not dead. Although the country had long been destroyed, the remaining forces repeatedly tried to make a comeback. Qi Man's old subordinates were even more restless, waiting for an opportunity to make a move against the great Jin dynasty. When Xiao Xiao was young, he had repeatedly gone deep into the Nanjiang. He had discovered that there seemed to be an extremely mysterious force in the Nanjiang that was currently uniting those scattered Nanjiang people. Although on the surface, it did not seem to be remarkable, but one day, Their goal would be to face the great Jin dynasty. When Xiao Xiao finished speaking, Jiang Ruan quietly looked at him. From beginning to end, Xiao Xiao's expression was very calm. His long eyelashes covered his eyes, making it impossible for people to clearly see his emotions. It seemed that he was used to not revealing his own thoughts, or perhaps it was because in the past years, he had already experienced enough things, so that now, there was no pain that could easily move him. Jiang Yuan slowly walked to his side and reached out to wrap her arms around his waist. No matter who it was, if at this time, they could feel some warmth, it would always be good. Xiao Xiao's body stiffened, and he seemed to tremble. Slowly, he reached out to cover her soft arms around his waist. Since you are not willing to enter the palace and become the emperor, and he treats you so well, why bother with the matters of the Nanjiang? Jiang Yuan said softly, you want revenge, but you can't let it go, right? He naturally referred to the emperor. In the whole matter, the emperor seemed to play a very unpleasant role. Perhaps it was because of his position, but in Jiang Ruan's view, among the children of Empress Dowager Ida, Crown Prince Hongxi and the emperor were actually not very suitable for the position of the emperor. On the contrary, it was Princess Yuanrong who was magnanimous and calm, but unfortunately, she was a woman. Crown Prince Hongxi was too soft-hearted and emotional, so he was more suitable to be a free and leisurely young master. And the current emperor was like a spoiled child. Although he had changed a lot because he was in a high position for so many years, in his bones, he was still the same, selfish and willful. This is what they sacrificed their lives to obtain, so I have to protect it. Xiao Xiao said lightly. They referred to Crown Prince Hongxi and Xiang Xiaoyuan, or perhaps Jinying Wang and his wife. Of these two couples, one was Xiao Xiao's biological parents, the other was Xiao Xiao's adoptive parents, but they both loved him the same way. Xiao Xiao's words were not wrong. His closest relatives had exchanged their lives for this country. Even if he did not sit in that position, he did not want it to decline and be occupied by outsiders. Do you hate him? Jiang Ruan asked. She was talking about the emperor. If not for the emperor, at that time, Xiang Xiaoyuan would not have met with an accident, and Crown Prince Hongxi would not have come out of seclusion to quell the rebellion, disheartened. If not for the emperor, Xiao Xiao's identity would forever be a secret, and perhaps he would just be the Xiao Wanye of Jinying Wang Fu, a youth with a slightly cold temperament. Perhaps Jinying Wang and his wife would still be alive. Not important. Xiao Xiao replied. Jiang Ruan's hand slightly paused, and then she also smiled. In that case, you and I are somewhat similar. Originally, I thought that I was not worthy of you, but now, I also feel that. Doesn't seem to be so bad. You once said that you hoped to help me take revenge. Ah Xiao, I will remember your enmity on your behalf. It was rare for her to call Xiao Xiao, a Xiao, in such a gentle manner. Xiao Xiao was startled and softly said, N. Jiang Yuan blinked her eyes, intentionally wanting him to not be so heavily immersed in those memories, so she said, in that case, Housekeeper Lin is probably not an ordinary person. Is he your father's former subordinate? He was originally the third flower of the previous dynasty. Xiao Xiao said, after my father passed away, he entered Jinying Wang Fu and became a housekeeper, concealing his identity. Jiang Yuan was astonished, third flower. Speaking of which, Housekeeper Lin's original name was Lin Wei. At that time, he had come from a poor family, and had received the appreciation of Crown Prince Hongxi, who had spent money to help him enter the Imperial College. In his youth, he had been the third flower of the younger generation. He had an elegant demeanor, and when he was a youth dressed in splendid clothes, he had also been a close friend of Crown Prince Hongxi at that time. Before Crown Prince Hongxi had died, he had entrusted Xiao Xiao to Jinying Wang. At that time, Lin Wei's family had no relatives, so he had simply cut off his official career. He had only said that he wanted to resign and live in seclusion, but he had concealed his identity. He had even taken the medicine that teacher Ba Qi had prescribed to change his appearance, and he had become Housekeeper Lin, taking care of Xiao Xiao. Over the years, he had seemed unreliable, but at many times, he had quietly helped Xiao Xiao with many things. Where Jinying Wang and his wife had neglected, housekeeper Lin had been very cautious. He had learned a lot, but he had to pretend to be vulgar and ignorant. No one would associate this crazy, long-winded, vulgar person in front of them with the handsome third flower of the previous dynasty. Housekeeper Lin had used his own way to imperceptibly influence Xiao Xiao on many things. Such a person could not but be said to have great benevolence and wisdom. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.